chairing this afternoon, except for one item, and I'll come on to that. I'm also a councillor for Southey Ward. I'll hand you over to Abby to announce the housekeeping arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from staff and stewards. The assembly point is at Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It is also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission. For example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Abby. I will now ask each member in turn to introduce themselves. Alan.
I'm Councillor Alan Woodcock, East Ecclesfield Ward and co-chair of Planning and Highways.
Councillor Nikki Belfield, member for Firth Park Ward.
Councillor Janet Riddler, member for Stocksbridge and Upper Don.
Councillor Mark Whittaker, also member for Stocksbridge and Upper Don.
Good afternoon. Councillor Tony Downing, member for Mossborough Ward.
Hi everyone, Councillor for Netheridge and Sharrow Ward, Nigat Bishara.
Good afternoon everybody. My name is Councillor Gary Weatherall for Shire Green and Brightside Ward.
Hello, I'm Marianne Elliott, Councillor for Gleadless Valley.
Henry Nottage, Councillor for Hillsborough Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Glynis Chapman, Councillor for Mossborough Ward.
Afternoon, my name's Cliff Woodcraft, elected member for Fulwood Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Richard Williams and I represent the Stanleyton Ward.
Thank you, everyone. I should add that we also have Councillor Laura Moynihan in the room, and when we get to item 8, she will be substituting for me. Do we have any apologies for absence?
No, Chair.
And there are no items for excluding the press and public. Item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest in any of the items of business on the agenda?
Chair, just for transparency, I'm a member for Stocksbridge and Upper Don, but I do reside in Dore and Totley Ward. However, I don't live anywhere near the tennis club. I'm not a member of the tennis club. I don't know anybody that is a member of the tennis club, and I have no preconceived view on this. It's just for transparency, I wanted to make that point. Thank you, Chair.
That is transparently clear. Nikki Belfield.
Just to say I live in Ecclesfield Ward, but obviously I won't be commenting or taking part in that discussion. So.
Thank you. Any other members? Good. That's declarations of interest done. Item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. Are members happy to approve them as a correct record? That's the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of April, the Planning and Highways Committee. It starts on page 13. I'm not going to go through it page by page. There was only the one substantive item there in the minutes of that meeting, of the previous meeting to that. Okay, are you happy to agree them as a correct record? Thank you very much. We now come on to item 7, Tree Preservation Order number 487355, Sharrow Lane, Sheffield, S11 8AQ. And I should have said earlier that I was going to ask officers to introduce themselves as they come to each of the items that they are going to speak on. So over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Just to introduce myself, my name is Vanessa Lyons. I'm the Community Tree Officer who deals with planning related matters in relation to tree protection. I'm seeking confirmation today of TPO 487. It was made on the 14th of November 2024 and it protects a mature horse chestnut tree in the front garden of 355 Sharrow Lane. A copy of the order with its accompanying map is attached as Appendix A in the report. Situated in the Netherwich Conservation Area, the tree is protected to a limited extent by Section 211 of the Town and Country Planning Act. In October 24, it was subject to a Section 211 notice seeking to re-pollard the tree, although the proper terminology here would be to top the tree. This would entail removal of the tree's canopy and leave a 6 metre high stem. The reasons given to support the work were leaf, branch and conker fall, which were difficult to manage and which had clogged gutters and damaged the car below. Safety concerns regarding potential branch loss were raised, as was damage to the adjacent wall and issues of light and squirrels entering the roof of the adjacent building. A site visit was conducted by me on the 25th of October and a tempo assessment of the tree was conducted. You can see a copy of that at Appendix B. I also considered at this time the rationale put forward in support of the pruning. Following from this, it was my recommendation that it would be expedient in the interests of amenity to make the tree subject to a tree preservation order. With regards to the amenity of the tree, it's a mature horse chestnut of significant stature and it stands in a prominent location at the top of a hill where it is very publicly visible from a number of vantage points, including from the roundabout that serves 5 busy roads through Netherwich. And there are a series of 3 pictures that are shown on the tree in the big screen. So there we have the tree as it stands at the top of Sharrow Lane. There we have the tree as you approach it from up Sharrow Lane. The red dot shows which tree it is. And then finally, that's the view of the tree from the roundabout that serves the 5 roads. In terms of form and condition, the tree has been historically topped and you can see from the tempo that it has lost points for this. It was done around 18 years ago, which was estimated from Google Street View images, and it has subsequently regrown a fine upright canopy. Despite having bleeding canker, which is a disease that's fairly endemic through horse chestnut trees in the UK, it's in really, really good condition and there is no real kind of major defects that I could see that would necessitate such heavy pruning. The tree is in very good outward condition considering its great age and the inhospitable location in which it is growing. Of significant stem diameter, I estimate its age to be around 150 years old, possibly older, which is significant for a tree in such an urban location as this. In terms of future potential retention, an estimate of 20 to 40 years is given with the assumption that the old age of the tree may mean that the future lifespan is towards the lower end of the range. An assessment of the location in which the tree is growing indicates nothing that would curtail the tree's retention. It's close to the roof, but there is minor pruning that could be done to alleviate this. The tree was scored with 1 point to reflect the fact that previous pruning has altered its form, but a more generous assessment could have given it 3 points to reflect habitat importance, given that in 2017 this species of tree was classified as a declining species and vulnerable to extinction. In terms of the rationale put forward to support the pruning and the potential impact of the pruning would remove the upper canopy in a manner known as topping. This is considered so damaging that best practice as outlined in British standards states it should only be used as a last resort for retaining valuable trees which would otherwise pose an unacceptable risk to people or property through collapse. To be clear, this is not the condition that this tree is in. Although this tree has previously survived this level of pruning in the past, there's no guarantee that it would survive such pruning again. It would be a gamble, I think, to enact this pruning to the tree, particularly given its old age. Trees do slow down in their ability to regenerate as they age, and combined with the harsh urban surroundings in which it grows and the pre-existence of bleeding canker, and the damage that would be done by the topping itself, it's my professional opinion that the pruning could destroy the amenity value of the tree, but also just might kill the tree outright. I've appended an image at the very end of the report to illustrate this risk. This is a large horse chestnut tree that I know that has been historically topped, regrown a very large canopy, that's been subsequently removed, and now the tree has died. My assessment was that the tree doesn't pose a significant threat to safety such that topping is required. It is close to the house, but this could be managed through lesser pruning. The wall is bowed near the tree, but it isn't in contact with the wall. The wall can be fixed with the tree in situ. It doesn't require topping to do this. Leaf conchful are appreciated, but they're natural consequences of having trees within an urban environment. Such problems are offset by the multiple ecosystem benefits trees provide, and other remedies are available, such as gutter covers, parking cars away from tree canopies, that could address these issues without resorting to extreme levels of pruning that would adversely damage the health and amenity of the tree in question. In terms of squirrel access, squirrels will definitely use a tree to gain access to a roof, but once they have found a safe, warm place to nest, they will not be deterred, and I think that even removal of the tree would not prevent their regaining access. I know from bitter experience that they can very easily climb the walls of your house in order to gain access into a roof space. The only solution in this instance, I feel, is to prevent ingress through fixing holes in the roof. One objection and one representation in favour of the TPO has been received. They can be seen at Appendix C alongside my response. I've already discussed many of the points raised in the objection which relate to the rationale for pruning, but additional points contained in the objection are as follows, which is that the tree blocks light. So there's quite a lengthy discussion in the report about the legal position of the right to light, and I won't go through all of those points here, other than to say that the right to light has been asserted by the objector, but no evidence has been provided which establishes the existence of this right. The exacerbation of asthma symptoms is stated, but no evidence has been presented to the council to clearly implicate the tree as the cause of this. And issues around the processes involved in the making of the TPO have been raised. The objector states that he was acting on advice from tree surgeons regarding the recommended level of pruning, had no intention to kill the tree, and if advised would have found alternate solutions. In May 24, before the submitting of the Section 211 notice, 2 tree surgeons approached the planning department because they'd been asked by the applicant to give quotes to top the tree, and they were seeking the planning department's advice as to whether this would be acceptable. The purpose of seeking pre-application advice in this manner is to potentially avoid submitting a Section 211 notice seeking works that might trigger a TPO, given that a notice, once submitted, begins a process through which one of 2 possible outcomes result. Either the works are permitted or they trigger a TPO. My opinion, given to the tree surgeons at this time, was that the proposed works would be harmful to the amenity and health of the tree and would likely be opposed if a Section 211 notice was submitted. I believe I stated at the time a lesser canopy reduction of around 3 metres would be deemed acceptable. Email communications shows the applicant was informed of this, but that they reiterated that topping was the chosen course of action. This was followed by a site visit from me with one of the tree surgeons. The applicant was not present, and again it was reiterated that proposed pruning would be harmful to the health of the tree and to its amenity. Despite this, a Section 211 notice was subsequently submitted seeking topping. With this in mind, I feel that the applicant was given sufficient information to be able to reasonably anticipate topping would be opposed and therefore a TPO may follow. Prior to the TPO being made, the applicant was also sent communication from the manager of the Design and Conservation Trees team regarding the intended TPO and why it was being made. Regarding the lack of an appointment being made and the objector being therefore unprepared with regards to alternate proposals, I'm not in a position where I can make appointments for each of the 400 to 500 visits that I do a year. The resource and time constraints that this would create would mean that I wouldn't be able to get around all the different appointments. In any case, the preparation of alternate proposals at this stage would be moot as the Section 211 notice had already been submitted. So in closing, what I want to say is that I think that this is quite, well, it's a very, very old tree. Particularly, I think it's quite unusual to find such an old tree in an urban location. I do think that the tree would be destroyed as an amenity and possibly that the proposed pruning would kill the tree were it to occur, and my recommendation, therefore, or my hope would be that the TPO is confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you for that thorough report, Vanessa. Do members have any questions? No? Do members have any comments? Richard.
Yeah, I guess the difficulty I have is your very thorough report, but it's kind of, it conflicts with the various advice from multiple tree surgeons And as a non-expert, that's always a difficulty. Now, as I understand it, what you're saying is if they were to go ahead with this topping at 6 to 8 metres, it would ultimately destroy the tree, is your professional opinion?
I think it might. I mean, it's a living thing, you know, we can never kind of state with 100% certainty. But in my professional opinion, I think that it stands a good chance of killing the tree, yes. And I just want to say, I obviously don't want to be detrimental to any of the tree surgeons that have given advice, but tree surgeons may have different motives for proposing certain works, and different tree surgeons have different levels of experience. Now, I know nothing about the tree surgeons that have, you know, suggested this work. They may have lots and lots of experience, they may have lots of learning, they may have kind of an eye on amenity, all of those things, but they also may not. It isn't really possible for me to know. But in my expert opinion as the tree officer that is here to kind of guide you in these matters, my recommendation would be that the tree has a requisite amenity to be protected, and that I have concerns that were the works carried out, that it would very badly impact on the health of the tree, yes.
Just for my simple mind, that in your opinion there is a significant potential risk in something going wrong with this tree if that was to be carried out. Obviously there's no guarantees, but yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you very much for that clarity.
And I just want to add, sorry, even if the tree were to survive, I think it would be sufficiently compromised as something that we can consider as an amenity.
Okay. Councillor Nigat.
Yeah, just if you can shed some light, I've just read in terms of, you know, the squirrel access to the roof. I know you explained that could happen anyhow. The bit about asthma symptoms, if you can shed some light on that. Is it the individuals with asthma, or because it doesn't read fully into that? And second bit is about sorry, the pruning side. You know, is that a bit of pruning to avoid it actually affecting the property? Because just from experience, the knock-on effect of you know, some of the branches on people's living day to day, because of experience. But obviously, the rest I understand what you've actually shared about the tree.
Thank you. I don't think I can add anything more with regards to the asthma. The personal information has been redacted. It's just that we have had information that the objector believes that the tree causes an exacerbation of asthma symptoms. But as I say in the report, we don't really have any further information and nothing that would tie the tree into being the cause of that. In terms of pruning, the TPO does not prevent the tree from being pruned, it just makes it subject to the need for an application. And there's definitely a need, I would say, for the branches to be brought away from the roof. I can see that. It's just that the pruning that I think would be reasonable is far less and would be far less harmful than the proposal to remove the entire upper canopy of the tree.
Nikki.
Thank you, Chair. Just a really quick question. On page 35 of the report, you've got the photograph of another horse chestnut, which you believe has survived topping, only to then the regrown canopy was removed and it died. So I suppose my question is, how common is it that happens?
It's a really difficult question to answer because I'd need to kind of see all the trees and then, you know, assess the works to them and be able to see the outcome. It's a case-by-case basis. I think when we recommend works to trees, we use our best experience and we kind of look at lots of different factors: the health of the tree, its age, what kind of life it's got, the pre-existence of any diseases, and we make a best guess, really, bearing in mind that it's a living organism. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. In this instance, just all of the factors that I've described in the report lead me to think that this is not a tree that may kind of react well to that. It just in terms of its harsh environment that it grows in, it's a bit of a survivor, this tree. And because of its great age, I kind of want it to survive for longer, so I don't want to put it under the sort of pressure that having to recreate a whole new canopy will put it under. So, yeah, I can't answer directly, but yeah, it is not uncommon for trees to just up and die. Sometimes they respond brilliantly. A lot of it will depend on the stored energy that they have within them in order to be able to regenerate a canopy. But that's not something that we can know. It's invisible to us.
Thank you for that. Before we go any further, I'd just like to remind members that we have, in addition to the TPO, we have 4 quite substantial items on the agenda today, although one of them is particularly focused on one issue. I hope you're all prepared for quite a long session, and you might want to bear that in mind when you're phrasing your questions and comments. I have been remiss because I skipped over item 6, which is site visits.
We'll come back to that one.
We'll come back to that, and over something else, which I need to come back to. But if there are no more questions or comments, can we move to a vote on this, please? Can we do that by show of hands? All those in favour of the application as presented? I see that as being unanimous. And now I must come back to the earlier point of the site visits. This is something that we always have on here. We always say that the date and the time of the next site visit is to be advised. And right now we do not have that date in our diaries even. So hopefully something will be sorted out in the next few weeks or few days even on that. And then one thing I've been remiss on in declarations of interest, and I should say that in a professional capacity, I do know Jane Newman because she was previously a senior planning officer for the Peak District National Park Authority where I sit. But it's purely in that role, and I have not come to the item which she's going to speak on with any view one way or another, so I do not come to it with any preconceived ideas. Now, I'm going to vacate the chair, and we're happy that passed, didn't we? Yes. So I'm going to vacate the chair so that Councillor Alan Woodcock can take you through the item 8. No, item 8 is various regulations, isn't it? Why is that on there? Yeah, which I've said we've had 4 applications. Yes, so I will now vacate the chair and you will deal with item 8D. Thank you, Alan. I'll leave that for you.
So if I could just remind members, so councillors Nicky Belfield, Nigat Basharat, Henry Nottage and Cliff Woodcraft, that you can't take part in this item because you weren't here at the previous meeting. So if you'd just like to... No, just this one.
Right, we now move to item 8A, planning application number...
It's 8D, sorry.
8B, sorry. Yeah, miles right. 8D, yeah. Application number 23/01882, FUL, Ecclesfield Primary School, High Stores Road, Sheffield. I'd like to just remind members that we deferred this so that we could ask questions of someone from the flood department. So that's all that will be allowed to be asked about. We have a couple of speakers, but I'll get Chris to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you said, Chair, this item was previously considered by members at committee on the 9th of July 2024. The decision was deferred to allow for an officer from the League Local Flood Authority to be present to respond to any questions members had about the drainage aspects of the scheme, and James Owers from from the legal local flood authority is here to answer those. But before we get to that point, and obviously there are speakers as well, I just thought I'd kind of summarise the proposal in terms of what it is as a reminder, and also just quickly a brief summary of the topics that were discussed last time and some of the sort of outcomes or answers to the questions that were raised at that time. So the site, as you'll be familiar with, is Ecclesall Primary School, which is, as you can see from the image, surrounded on most sides, if not all, by housing. It's in an otherwise residential area, along with High Store School across the road. The red line boundary is a little odd here because it's the same red line boundary as when originally submitted the proposals for some works to provide a running surface on the right hand side of that image, but that's no longer part of the proposals. So the proposals are for a multi-use games area on an existing grassed area, which is sort of the toe end, the fat end of the red line at the bottom there. You can see where the grass has been worn away in that area. For context, it's 30 metres by 45 metres size. It'll be enclosed by a 1.2 metre high fence, which is a combination of a 700mm high board, a kickboard if you like, and 500mm mesh on top. In terms of the development plan, the wider area is housing, but the green areas within the site are defined as open space and retain a similar definition of or allocation of urban green space in the draft local plan. It's not a sports, the area isn't a sports field as such. It doesn't fit the definition of a sports field as defined by Sport England, and it won't actually result in a loss of the open space. The space remains there. It happens to be a low fence around a play area, almost similar to what you get with a playground in a park, that kind of height. So the open space is still there. It's being used for open space purposes. So there wasn't any policy conflict with that. Its purpose is to enable better, wider use of poor quality, poor draining grassed area, which can be unusable for many days and weeks of the year. It's not proposed to be open to the community, and it's not proposed to be floodlit. So they're the basics of the proposal. Just take you through some of the images. These, you will have seen these if you remember them from last time before. And you can see there some quite significant areas of where the grass has been worn away by play. This is, I think, sort of very early spring or late winter 2024. So this is the reason the applicant wishes to provide this facility, because it's not usable for lots of things for a lot of the year. This is looking back down towards the corner of the site and is the area where the running facility was to be proposed, and is a quite sizable green space in its own right, and that is the bottom corner of the site, which from the tree on the right hand side towards the end, the left hand side of the image would remain as grass space. This is indicating the proximity to houses. It is close to houses on all sides, on particularly Huntley and Edale Road. This is a plan you saw at the last meeting, and I mean, it now says superseded on it because the drainage proposals have been adjusted. But the position of the mugger is still in the same location. So the two large trees on the left hand side were the two large trees that you could see on the image. So just quickly flick back, those two there on the right hand side. And you can see there it does come close to the boundary of the rear of the gardens of properties on Edale and Huntley Road, in the order of about 5 metres from the edge of those properties. This is a cross section which I appreciate is a very small scale and be quite difficult for you to read, but the natural undulation in the land is being taken out for that particular area, to provide the mugger, which will be essentially flat. It'll have a fall of about 1 in 100 on it, but it's essentially, to all intents and purposes, is flat. And this is the most recent proposal, which incorporates the updated drainage design. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, Chair. So well, no, I'll talk about the drainage now. It's probably easiest to do that now. So since the last meeting, it's obviously been quite a long time, and you may wonder why that is. So there's been further work undertaken by the applicant's drainage consultant in liaison with the lead local flood authority, with officers from the lead local flood authority, and that's resulted in some minor revisions to the scheme. A small area of bunding and brick wall is provided in the northeastern and south, well, the eastern corners of the site. It's not really southeastern. You can just about pick them up on the top side and returning down on the bottom there, with a very short section of brick wall as well in the corner. When I say a bund and a wall, they're 300 millimetres high, so they're not tall features of themselves. They're at that lowest part of the site, the eastern edge, and that's why they're there as an additional, James will advise more clearly on this, but as an additional mechanism to ensure against, or to insure against flooding. The surface water disposal is essentially by infiltration, which is what you can see in the bottom left-hand corner. That image is demonstrating the structure, the makeup of the mugger, the land beneath the mugger, which is currently just compacted soil. So that's showing infiltration, and it's designed for a 1 in 100 year flood event, plus 40% climate change allowance. So we, having been advised by the LLFA, are satisfied those works won't exacerbate drainage conditions and are acceptable. And as I said, James is here to answer questions on that. Back to the kind of the things that we discussed last time. As I say, it's not open for community use, it's not floodlit. We don't feel it will generate greater noise for residents at the area's immediate, because the area is already in use and is used throughout the year, albeit there are the odd days when it can't. Condition 3 and on the recommendation provides for sound reduction measures in relation to the kickboards where balls or other equipment might kind of bang against them. And sorry, I've just lost my point there. Oh yeah, there were many concerns raised at the last meeting at the loss of the the grassed area. So the grass being replaced by an artificial surface. And notwithstanding that the current grassed areas are of poor quality, there are still significant areas of natural grass to the north and the west for more informal play and general free play. The scheme, the proposal, the application predates mandatory biodiversity net gain. We discussed that last time, and we talked about the work that the school does and has done in and around the site to enhance biodiversity, which we feel is an appropriate response. They continue to do that. The extent of the school's engagement with the community was discussed, and officers advised that that wasn't a planning consideration. That's a matter between for the school. So I think in conclusion, overall, members got to the point where the item was deferred for, as I said at the beginning, for someone from the LLFA to be present to respond to the questions and concerns that they had about the flooding aspects of the scheme. And that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. We've got two speakers on this against. One is Councillor Barbara Masters, so she'd like to, you know the score, Barbara.
Thank you, Chair. The officers' report from last July and this month both state that an acceptable drainage strategy is required for the Mugger to address surface water runoff and reduce the waterlogging in the locality. The decision was deferred last July to allow the school to produce a full drainage report to explain how this would be achieved. In August last year, it produced a report so flawed I was compelled to ask for clarifications. This has not been provided. The school has now submitted a simple document without any supporting information to explain or justify the figure and table of numbers it contains. Its members are still expected to decide whether the drainage design strategy is appropriate. The school's determined that the surface water can now be dispersed efficiently via infiltration, slowly through the layers of the Mugger, then onto the ground below. I refer you to the officer's comment on page 144 of your report pack, where in 2017, infiltration proposals in a focused area were not considered viable and may have proposed a threat to residential properties in terms of groundwater conditions. Last year, it proposed draining excess water into an attenuation tank on the site for it to flow from there. Instead, it again proposes an infiltration solution in a focused area, but there is no analysis to prove that significant harm is unlikely via this disposal route. Reference is made to the cross-section showing a depth of 1.4 metres below court level, but not the Mugger's relationship to the rest of the site, which is higher. Water will potentially drain from higher areas onto it, adding to the flooding risk. There are no details of the subsurface conditions which would confirm that it is sited in an appropriate position and is of a suitable construction to disperse any water migrating through the area. This could be established by appropriate drilling on site. Major changes have been made to the ground since 2017, so data acquired before this is unreliable. The creation of the Mugger would require excavation of most of the site, with some levelling off. This would significantly disturb an area already prone to flooding. No details of infiltration rates, hydrology, or the geology within the footprint of the proposed Mugger is available to properly inform on the suitability of the proposals. These are the questions. Has a recent detailed study of the site been made since 2017? If not, and approval is granted, will the committee place a condition on the school to undertake a detailed subsurface ground investigation to demonstrate that the ground and rainwater will be safely dispersed before any construction is carried out? The school also proposes that 2 bunds less than knee-high along adjacent sides of the Mugger will contain floodwaters on the site. It's expected that standing water will pond on the Mugger surface during storm events, but would be contained by the walls of the construction and the bund. No assessment of the volume of water that the surface can contain is provided, nor are the specifications for its permeability. It's a crucial design parameter which determines whether the surface is sufficiently permeable to prevent water building up behind the wall or bund, or prevent it finding a pathway to adjacent grounds and potentially through to neighbouring properties. It's a question again. Can the school explain how its proposals can be considered as adequate to cope successfully with increasingly intense stormwater events? If the application is approved, will a condition be placed for the school to provide the permeability specifications and for these to be approved prior to any construction taking place? If the school is confident that its proposals will not cause water ingress and damage onto neighbouring properties, can a condition be placed on it to take out insurance against this occurring? Residents should not be forced to claim off their own insurance for redress against any damage from water off the school site should this occur. The progress of this application has eroded trust in the school and its intentions in pursuing the creation of the mugger. If approval is granted, can a condition be placed on it so that residents and local councillors will automatically be notified of any applications by the school to vary any of the conditions imposed? It's regrettable that the school still wishes to pursue this when the council is rolling out its climate programme for schools built for change, where water and flooding and play surfaces and excess heat and the link to child development are explored, and the government will expect all schools to complete a climate action plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Barbara. Our next speaker is Anne Blanche, please. You have 5 minutes, Anne. Yeah, press the one to the right, the button to the right. That's it.
My name is Anne Blanchflower. I live on Edale Road and I speak on behalf of many residents. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and thank members in this room who listened carefully to the representations made by parent members of our action group in July and raised many valid questions resulting in this deferment. 7.5 years ago, I spoke in this room concerned about drainage to our properties when the expansion of the school was recommended for approval. A pre-commencement drainage condition was made in 2017, but 6 months later, drainage proposals were still not accepted by Yorkshire Water. The development went ahead anyway, and other conditions, including landscaping, were not enforced. The report states that a lead local flood authority would respond to members' questions today. I'm sorry, that doesn't seem to be happening. However, page 125 seems to show these plans have already been approved without even a drainage condition. A new drainage drawing was posted on the portal with some numbers based on groundwater levels from 2016 and testing done in 2017. This drilling was not even carried out on the footprint of the proposed mugger. The whole site since been redeveloped, subsoils changed and soil levels. No drainage strategy has been shared with any rationale or justification for model parameters. We're still left with no understanding, just real uncertainties. The council and residents deserve much better than this. 2 homes on Edale Road have flooded, evidence flooding to their properties since the expansion. I have photos which I thought I could give out today, but they are here if you wish to see them. They are at the point, the lowest point on that diagram there, so exactly where the worst of the flooding could possibly go. The soil came through the wall, travelled through the garden, the water came through the wall, travelled through the garden, under the house and garage, coming out onto Edale Road. This happened again on 20th of October 23. Flooding had never happened before the expansion. The garden has been flooded at least once each year. Why should this suddenly happen, and why should we not be concerned? The applicant is not taking responsibility for this. The resident on Edale Road was below this point, was told last year by the school that their plans to upgrade the school field would include drainage channels with soakaways to the attenuation tank. That's all completely been thrown away now. And that if the water on your land is from the natural flow from the school field, then the plans to upgrade our field will reduce this from occurring in the future. Reduce? I'm sorry. There has now been a complete U-turn on the original outline design, and they've selected infiltration that had already been ruled out by Michael Johnson at the previous planning expansion time. Would this satisfy you if it were your house? And would building a huge artificial construction give you confidence this would reduce or in fact increase the risk, especially using infiltration methods? The existing mugger has drainage piping. However, the photos you have proved that you could see have prove that the excess surface water does not in fact drain from this original mugger anyway into this tank. Because the clay soil is known to drain poorly, the second part of the drainage idea insists on a type 4 polymeric surface. It has a porous surface, but I quote from the very brief 2-page strategy posted by DICE Consultants. Since the system relies on infiltration, there may be instances where the network remains partially or fully saturated after a storm. If any saturation persists 48 hours after the storm has ended, the remedial action is to repair the surface or even completely remove and construct a new one. So it's okay that homes can flood then when that happens. There's nothing to demonstrate there's no increased risk to properties from the infiltration. The bund wall can take it. or that ponded water will go straight to ground. In fact, there's no proof at all that this would be a product better than the real grass field, which could be maintained at a fraction of the cost. DCM's own website and others said muggers should be avoid locating where ponding could be an issue, too close to forming leaf sap forming trees, which could drop sap all over the mugger and reduce the life of the surface, which is at best 8 to 10 years. In conclusion, this is an irresponsible application which is completely unacceptable to residents whose homes will be at risk for the construction of a huge synthetic surface surrounded by boards and fencing, which will not adequately meet the formal sports needs and will destroy forever the natural grass field that could work with better drainage, rotation and appropriate care for all sports and recreational free play with no borders and includes all children. It's not an open space they're recommending. It's fenced. As such, the loss would not be replaced by equivalent or better provision, and the benefits of alternate provision do not clearly outweigh the loss of the current use. National Planning Framework 103. And how can we trust that any conditions would consider the advice of the consultees? Thank you very much. I've finished. We don't have any faith in conditions, I'm sorry. Conditions have resulted in flooding already. Thank you. The photos I have, if anybody wishes them afterwards.
Chris?
Chair, I'm not sure there's a huge amount for me personally to respond to there, and maybe it's best if James' response comes from the questions from members rather than responding to what's been said. I'm just looking to see if there's anything I do need to pick up on. I mean, I think there are a few things about, could we condition the school to take out insurance, etc., against the potential for flooding? That's not something that's reasonable for a planning authority to do. In terms of any future amendments to the proposals to as a whole or to any specific conditions, then those would require applications and they would be subject to the normal criteria for publicity. So yes, publicity would be undertaken in respect of those. I think all the rest were about drainage matters, although the second speaker referred to conditions not being enforced last time. I don't have any details of that, Chair. I'm not aware that's the case. But so I can't say that that's correct or not, but I just don't have the information at the moment.
Thanks, Chris. Right, I'll introduce James from the local flood authority.
Chair, I just wonder if it's better if I think members will have questions about the flooding, whether it's better for...
No, I'm sure we say so.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to questions. Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the speakers for their contributions. Listening to the last speaker, they're not confident that what we're doing or what they're going to do at the school will give them confidence. How confident can we be that what is being put in place will actually do the job it's supposed to do and not just sort of paper over the cracks, if you understand what I'm saying? Are we confident that what they're putting down underneath this mugger, can we be confident that this will work and that people will not be affected by any water runoff once this has been done? Thank you, Chair.
James.
I've been assured by the design engineer that yes, it's capable of dealing with that volume of water. Sorry, yeah. I've been assured by the design engineer that yes, it will work. I've been sent calculations to review, and it shows that the infiltration structure that they're putting down will contain the 1 in 100-year storm plus 40% extra for climate change, and that's just underground. The extra bunding and the wall will retain further. The value within the calculations is smaller than what they plan to put down on ground, so therefore there's additional capacity underground as well.
Yeah, can I come back to you just quickly? If it doesn't do what it says it's going to do, what it says on the tin, what recourse do we have, or do they have as residents? Thank you.
If it doesn't do what it says it will do in the calculations, there's the additional storage within the storage. There's the additional storage within the infiltration structure that they're proposing, and the bund will retain more water. So it will retain more than it's supposed to be designed for.
Marianne?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, is it DCM Surfaces that's going to be doing this work?
I can't speak to that, I'm afraid.
Okay, well on the assumption it is, because that's the information I've read, they have quite a lot of instructions and guidance as to best practice, some about location, but I won't deal with that because we can't talk about it. Also, they say avoid locating muggers where there is ponding and tree sap. So with regards to the ponding, if that's something we can explore, because that's obviously something that we can discuss today. So essentially where's the water going to go? And I must express my disappointment as well, like the two speakers have said. It was my understanding that a clear and robust drainage assessment was going to be prepared so councillors could clearly understand how the proposed development will mitigate for an existing issue with water ponding that we know is an issue. And what's been uploaded to the planning portal is just, you know, a drawing and a table of numbers, which I assume are like model input parameters, but it's questionable whether an informed decision based on this information can actually be made by councillors today. So I just want to express my disappointment that we've not got the full information that would have, you know, allowed us to make a full you know, a more informed decision. So just going to ask you some questions on drainage, bearing in mind I'm not an expert, I've had to do some research. So if you look at the SAPCA guidance, which is the Sports and Play Construction Association, so that's like industry created guidance, it says that drainage design will normally form part of the client's design criteria, and then it says a basic design will have lateral drains incorporated beneath the pitch. Is this part of the proposal?
Lateral drains are not part of the proposal. It's essentially a permeable surfacing, so we don't use any pipes at all. So rainwater will land on the surface and then percolate through into the substructure.
Okay, thanks. And so the design now includes this wall, so it's a 300mm wall and a soil bund. So the designer must be expecting ponding during sort of high intensity rainfall and lateral runoff towards the gardens, Edale Road. So has the volume of lateral runoff been quantified?
Within the design calculations, the way that it's done is we use a computer model, and within the computer model you insert the parameters of what you're designing. So in this case, an infiltration structure, you size it out, and then you add in the rainfall data, and then you click go, and it tells you how much water will land on your patch, enter your system, and how your system reacts to that.
And based on that, you're confident to advise that this will work?
Yes, and I've also spoken to the design engineer, and they say yes, it should also work.
Thank you. And how far is the new proposed wall from the adjacent garden wall? It looks like it's only a few metres.
I don't know that answer to that question. I have to measure off the drawing.
Chair, it is I don't know exactly how many, it is a few metres. As I said at the beginning, the corners are about 5 metres from the wall.
Okay, so given its close proximity, do you think there should be a proposal for attenuation measures as well?
The wall is the attenuation measure, so it's been designed so that the substructure, the underground, will retain all the water, and then the wall and the bund are there as an extra over added layer of protection.
So I mean, noting that no infiltration tests have been undertaken within the actual footprint of the mugger, they've only been assessed via the proposed new surface. I think that's right, isn't it? So how do you know if the ground can cope with that sort of localised input of surface water at the wall, which you have just said is the attenuation? Has that been quantified?
Sorry, can you repeat that one, please?
So what calculations have been done to anticipate how much the localised surface water is going to build up at the apex of that wall, being that that's where it's all going to end?
Okay. So the sub-storage has been designed to a 1 in 100 year storm plus 40%, and that's what's required by planning. So anything more than that is extra storage. So that hasn't been essentially calculated because it doesn't need to meet requirements.
Okay, and are you confident with that?
Yes, because it's retaining the 1 in 100 year plus 40%, which is a lot. 1 in 100 year essentially means it's the likelihood of a storm, so it's a massively unlikely storm, plus an extra 40% on top that it retains within the sub-storage. Then anything on the surface is extra above that requirement.
Okay, just one more to get your opinion on something. So, as mentioned by one of the speakers, in the summary at page 144, in relation to the planning history when the site was developed 7 years ago or so, it says initial infiltration proposals in a focused area were not considered viable, and it was felt that these may have proposed a threat to residential properties in terms of groundwater. So is this not a plan for an infiltration proposal in a focused area, i.e. that wall?
I'm unsure. Essentially, that would have been a different project, no? Just on the same site, is that right?
Yeah, I think you're asking a question about something that's not part and parcel of this, Marion, because that was in the past.
Well, I think it was a comment made in relation to previous queries about this issue when there was when the school expanded, is my understanding. So it is all related, and that was the assessment at that point.
Okay, well, following planning guidance, we have a hierarchy of drainage options, which is essentially dictating how you should dispose of surface water from a site. So first of all, you have to consider infiltration as a method of surface water discharge. Then it's to a water body. Then it's to surface water sewers, and then it's to a combined sewer. So infiltration has to be considered first off. And the designer has determined that's suitable for this site.
So are you confident that there's sufficient analysis to prove that significant harm is unlikely via that disposal route?
Yes.
Richard?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I don't want to repeat, but I am kind of following up some of these earlier comments or questions. I suppose ultimately it's, and the dilemma I have is it's a bit like tree preservation thing. It's a bit of a leap of faith you're asking us to make. And I guess, I mean, Councillor Downing asked the question, what happens if this happens? You said, well, we've got this backup, etc. I suppose the ultimate question is, ultimately, if all the backups you have fail, which has to be on the grounds, in my experience of life, there's no 100% guarantee, what recourse do the residents have? Both in planning terms, but also, I mean, the answer is no, so I won't even ask a question, but you can't just rip up the mugger because it's not working. But seriously, what recourse do the residents have if at the end of the day, all the things you put in to try and protect them just doesn't work?
Thank you, Chair. Just in the same way as anybody as a landowner, if you have an issue with your land that you believe is caused by somebody else, then you need to go to them and discuss that with them. And obviously then you'd be free to take your own legal advice and to see what could result. I think probably the deeper question perhaps you're referring to is if if there was some sort of malfunction with this solution. And obviously, if that was the case, like yourselves as private individuals, if you have a product, a service that you purchase that then doesn't function as designed, then you take your action, you take your advice, and you go through those processes. So there isn't anything sort of different in this case. So I hope that answers your question. But just while I've got the microphone on, I just want to remind members that the reason for the deferral is in the minutes as inviting somebody from the Flood Authority to come and answer questions. So in terms of the reason for deferral and what's happened, that has happened. But obviously in the intervening period, the drainage system has been revised. So yeah, that's the reason for the longer delay. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. Jane.
I do appreciate, however, that technical documents have been submitted in regards to calculations, and it's difficult to understand what it shows with it being technical documentation. If you've never seen a drainage model output before, I appreciate that that's difficult to read.
Any more questions? Well, can we move to comments? Laura?
Yes, I was one of the people who wanted to defer it for drainage questions. We've had significant reassurance from the expert here, so I've got to have faith in that. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong, but I've got to have faith in that. My view is we've got to move more strategy for this city. It's really important that that happens with children and young people. Currently, the school is unable to deliver the national curriculum number of hours for physical activity, as stated in the report. So, on balance, I would support it now. I've had those insurances re-drainage.
Anyone else on comments?
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to Marianne as well for the questions that you asked. I felt that was very important, because I think given the importance of the drainage issue here, I'm not convinced that it's been fully addressed. I mean, it's certainly not been addressed to the satisfaction of local residents, and I do perceive that there is significant lack of confidence in this. As you say, it is a what-if scenario. There does seem to be, a lot of store placed on getting this mugger into this particular location, despite its proximity to local houses and the possible results of that in terms of flooding, lack of privacy. I've noted that although obviously the school has said that they have no intention at the moment to open this to community use, that wouldn't preclude the mugger actually being used as perhaps an attractive way of opening up to community use in future. And I just, I suppose the thing that gives me pause is that I agree with everything that Councillor Monahan said about physical activity, but that doesn't necessarily have to be done on an artificial surface, a fenced artificial surface. And I would have liked to have seen more openness in terms of perhaps looking into reparation of a seeded grassed area, which I think could have been accomplished to the benefit of perhaps a wider, more inclusive set of pupils, as it has been, sort of documented that fenced-off artificial spaces do exclude some of the more, perhaps quieter children from that. It is a difficult one, but I do have sufficient concerns to be against this application.
Thanks, Janet. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind members that planning decisions need to be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So just in respect of some of the comments so far, there's about some mention about I'd rather it was grass as opposed to an a artificial surface. Obviously, a preference as to what you think should happen there isn't a material consideration to take into account. Obviously, having concerns about some of the wider issues is quite valid in terms of having any concerns, but just want to remind members about that need to consider the development plan and material considerations. Thank you, Chair.
We'll now move to the vote. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back, sorry, to James as well. For me, I haven't got enough confidence in the drainage proposals from your responses, and I just want to come back on your insinuation that we can't understand the designs because they're too complicated. Actually, you know, I think it's quite the contrary. They are not good enough, they're not detailed enough, there's no description of the drainage design, the strategy, the justification for the model, discussion of the risk assessment methodology. We don't have any of that information. I think further to that, as you know, we discussed last time, for me, I will not be voting for this. The MPPF 104 relates to playing fields, clearly says a loss resulting from development must be replaced by an equivalent or better provision in terms of quality and location. There's obviously serious concerns about location. Even the manufacturer guidance says it needs to be at least 12 metres, ideally 30, from the neighbouring properties. And also 104C benefits must clearly outweigh the loss of the current use, and I've not heard any compelling evidence today or at the last hearing in July that suggests the benefits of an additional mugger. Bearing in mind this is a second mugger, which will be replacing a field, and there has not been sufficient evidence to suggest that will outweigh the loss of a playing field. So I'll be voting against this.
Chair, sorry, I wonder whether I could just come here. I think it's probably important to say that there is no loss of playing fields in this proposal. This is a replacement mugger, replacing an exit. So a lot of the passages that have just been referenced there aren't necessarily relevant to the decision making in this case. I think perhaps it's also just worth reflecting that, you know, if we have a 1 in 100 year storm, we're going to get sort of rain, flooding across the field and probably the neighbouring properties. And the difference, this proposal is designed to try and mitigate that. So potentially it could make the situation better, not worse. So flooding will always occur where you've got when you have a 1 in 100 year storm, you will get flooding. And I think that also it's just worth saying that of course committee can explore material planning considerations, and drainage is one of them. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence and some knowledge of the sort of the drainage conditions in the area. But we've got no data or evidence to sort of counter what's being proposed to you today. And you do have the expert advice of someone from the lead local flood authority. So I just wanted to remind members that you know, sort of to refuse on the basis of the drainage proposals, you need to be sort of confident, I think, that those reasons will withstand scrutiny. Thank you.
Thanks, Dore. We'll move to the vote.
Sorry, Chair. Could I just ask, the planning officer there has just made a point about this may improve the situation. Just thought it may be useful to ask the expert on the matter whether they've got a view on that. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, it provides more storage, essentially, than it does currently. It will improve the situation on the site. Sorry, I'll lean in. Yes, it will improve the situation on site from existing. It provides more storage. It should provide a benefit and reduce surface water runoff.
Thanks, James. Richard?
Yeah, based on that, can I ask a very simple question? As I understand what you just said, putting this in is better flood protection for the residents than what that currently is. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
No more comments, no more questions? Shall we move to a vote, please? So, by hand, for the officer recommendation. Against? And there is no abstention. That's passed, thank you. Right, we'll go and fetch people in and swap places.
Everybody, but it's me who's come back, isn't it? Thank you, Alan, for taking members through that last item. Now that's been resolved, we're moving on to what I have as item 8A on the agenda, which is the planning application number 24/03668/full Dore and Totley Tennis Club at 48 Devonshire Road, Sheffield 17 3NW, and that's on page 39 of the agenda. So we're going.
Sorry, I want to listen to it.
Sorry, we're just conferring, bear with. That's not what we have on our agenda. So I do apologise, everyone. There's a change of order. So we will now go to item 8C, which is planning application 24/00920/full for Bearley Wood Recycling Village at 2 Bearley Wood Lane, Sheffield S6 1QT. And that is on page 81 of the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. This slide, it showed the application relates to the area of land outlined in red below. The land is located to the northwest of Claywheels Lane Industrial Estates and it's accessed from Claywheels Lane. There is a slight error in the red line boundary on this slide, and that's our doing when putting this on the slide. So the red line boundary there cuts through a large building sort of in the middle of the site, whereas that red line boundary is actually to the north of that building. It doesn't include that building, which is to be retained and doesn't form part of this application. This is an aerial image which illustrates the site and its context. To the north of the site is the railway line, and beyond that is open countryside. To the west of the site is Beeley Woods. To the south of the site is some of the industrial area, and the industrial area extends to the west of the site as well. Residential properties are located to the south of the site, to the south of Meadow Head Road, and there is also an industrial property, a residential property, to the north of the site at Underhill Farm. This is a zoomed out aerial image just to show that context in a bit more detail, so you can see the industrial area to the east and the residential areas to the south. The application has been submitted by Blue Phoenix, who currently operate an IBA processing plant on the site. So IBA is incinerator bottom ash, and it's essentially a byproduct of energy from waste incineration plants. The IBA is brought to the site and it's processed to remove the metals, which are recycled further, and the remaining material which is left forms an aggregate known as IBAA, which is incinerator bottom ash aggregate, and that aggregate can be used in the construction industry, for example in the construction of roads. The IBA processing plant is managed through an environmental permit from the Environment Agency, and the proposal is to expand the use of the current site into an additional area and to increase the processing of IBA. So just to run through a few images of the site. This is an image taken from the northeast. You can see the piles of aggregate at the far in the image there. And to the left-hand side of the image is an existing industrial building which doesn't form part of this site. That's a food recycling plant. To the north of the site, you can see that there's a boundary wall and some trees which are at an elevated height, and the railway line is beyond that. The area of hard standing in the foreground of the picture is the area that it's proposed to expand on and to process, to store the aggregate. This is a view of the eastern site boundary. You can see the pile of processed aggregate to the left-hand side of the screen, and there's a view over the area for the proposed expansion in the foreground there. This is another image taken from the east of the site. Again, you can see the processed aggregate there, and you can see how the land levels are fairly low and that the land levels rise to the rear of the site. That's a similar image just taken from a slightly greater distance. This is a view from inside the site, close to the northern boundary, which shows the piles of unprocessed and processed aggregate. Again, another image from inside the site showing this is the processed aggregate that you can see here. And again, you can see the retaining wall to the rear of that and the trees set at the higher level. This is again another image from inside the site of the aggregate. You can see that there's some steam rising from the unprocessed IBA there. The steam, it should be highlighted that that is steam and not dust, and that's because the IBA has come out of the energy from waste plant, which is an incinerator, so it's very hot, and it's brought to the site, dampened down, so it has a moisture content of 20% to act as a dust suppression measure, essentially. So when it comes to site, the mixture of that sort of moisture in it and the heat means that steam rises from the aggregate. This is a view of the existing processing building on site and the lagoon. So the site is formed of concrete, impermeable concrete, and it's fully sealed. So the water from the site, so for example from the water that's part of the dust suppression measures, drains off to this lagoon, and then it is reused in water cannons as part of the dust suppression measures. This is an image of one of the water cannons on the site. This is a mobile water cannon, and there are a number of mobile water cannons and static cannons which are around the perimeter of the site, and they are used to dampen down the material on the site to act as a dust suppression measure. These are some longer views of the site taken from the Middlewood Road North housing estate to the south on the opposite side of the valley. So on there you can make out the pile of ash material to the left hand side of the screen, and then to the right hand side you can make out the existing building which is not part of this application, and that's the food recycling building. You can also make out a chimney there that is no longer there, that's recently been demolished. And this is an image from a similar position, and again you can make out the pile of ash there on the left hand side of the screen, the existing building, and then the chimneys which have been demolished. So the proposal comprises two phases of development. The first phase is for the area shown in yellow on this image here. The existing site operations are confined to the area in blue, and it's proposed to expand the operations onto the area highlighted in yellow there. That area in yellow will then be used to store the processed aggregate, so the IBAA. And as part of those phase one operations, in addition to expanding onto this part of the site, it's also proposed to increase the throughput of the material process from 200,000 tonnes per annum, which is the current limit, to 300,000 tonnes per annum. It's also proposed to increase the operating hours by an additional hour on Monday to Friday. So at the moment it operates from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. and it's proposed to operate from 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. The Saturday hours are proposed to also alter. Overall, it's the same number of hours proposed. So at the moment the site operates 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. and it's proposed to shift that all an hour earlier so that the hours are 7 a.m. till 4 p.m. It's also proposed to allow HGV movements to the site, so for the deposition and the collection of the materials to align with the proposed operating hours. Currently they're restricted to 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, with no HGV movements on Saturdays or Sundays. And it's also proposed to allow maintenance hours to align with the proposed operating hours, whereas at the moment they align with the proposed operating hours, but obviously as they are proposed to change, it's proposed to change their maintenance hours to match those, and also to allow maintenance on Saturdays and Sundays between 8 and 6, which is actually already allowed at present. Originally, the application proposed operating hours on a Sunday, in addition to those which I've mentioned, and on bank holidays, but we have resisted that owing to questions about the suitability of the noise climate, and I'll go into a bit more detail of that shortly. The phase 2 development relates to the area of land shown in blue, and essentially the proposal here is to demolish the existing plant which is located along the western boundary and to construct a new building to the south of the site. So that's that building that is quite close to the south boundary and is quite dark there. There's also proposals to alter the internal layout and the storage areas for the IBA, which will be stored on the blue part of the site, whereas the processed aggregate will be stored on the yellow part of the site there. This is the proposed building. It is of an industrial character. It will be 16.2 metres to ridge height, 50 metres long and between 24 and 30 metres in depth. So in terms of land use, the site is located within a general industry area where open storage is acceptable. The proposal is an expansion of an existing use onto a brownfield industrial site. It will support the aims of Core Strategy Policy 68, which seeks to reuse and recycle waste products and recover value from the energy from waste plant. In terms of national policy, the proposal supports the aims of the MPPF, which is the Environmental Sustainability Objective, includes reference to minimising waste, and paragraph 223, which identifies the need to consider the use of secondary aggregates, which this is a secondary aggregate, prior to the extraction of primary materials. In terms of design, the new building is industrial in appearance and appropriate in the context of that industrial area. The scale is similar to the existing industrial building to the east of the site, and the new building and the piles of material stored externally are not overly visible from the bottom of the valley, but they become increasingly more visible when you get up to a higher levels as you're going out of the valley and up the sides. So the applicant has done a landscape and visual impact assessment to assess the impact of the new building and the stock piles from long-range views. So I'll just move forward to those images to try and illustrate. So this is viewpoint 1, which is taken from Stockarth Lane, which is to the south-west of the site. So hopefully you can make out the, so our site is to the very far side of the screen. You can see the industrial estate and the existing piles of ash and aggregate are to the left-hand side of the screen. And then with the proposed development, this is what it would look like. So you can see that the ash, the piles of stored materials have expanded further to the east, and you can just make out the black building, which is the new proposed building there. This is viewpoint 2, which is taken from Meadow Head Drive east to the south of the site. Again, you can make out the pile of stored materials there and the existing food recycling building to the east. This is an image of what the proposal will look like, so you can see that new building and you can see increased storage of materials externally. And then this viewpoint is taken from Worrell Road. Again, you can see the industrial estate, and then this is the existing image, existing view, and this is the proposal. So again, you can make out the increased storage of materials and the new building. One point to note is that although the existing stockpiles are restricted to 8 metres in height, and it's proposed to have those stockpiles at 12 metres in height, the existing stockpiles are actually exceeding the 8 metres at present, so they are at about 10.7 metres high. So it's just worth noting that so that members are aware that the height on top of what they've seen on site won't be another 4 metres. It will in fact be an additional approximately 1.3 metres at the points where the storage is the highest at present. Officers consider that in the context of the wider industrial estate, that the impact, although there will be an increased visual impact, that the proposal sits within the context of that industrial estate. And there's some screening offered from the existing trees on site, but also it's viewed against the backdrop of the rising hills to the rear of the site, which offer a backdrop and reduce the impact of the proposal. So although there will be some additional impact, it's not considered that that impact will be significant. In terms of amenity, the nearest noise-sensitive properties are positioned, there's an isolated dwelling to the north of the site at Underhill Farm, which is approximately 250 metres away, and then there's dwellings on Meadow Head Road, which are approximately 200 metres away. Regards also being had to the Wynn Gardens estate, which is about 600 metres away, and the Meadow Head Road estate, which is approximately 500 metres away. A noise assessment has been undertaken to support the application. That monitored noise at a variety of locations, including at the nearest noise-sensitive properties detailed above. At all locations, it was found that the monitored noise was dominated by existing road noise, and that industrial noise was sometimes audible when there were lulls in the traffic, but as stated that the road traffic was the dominant noise there. The noise report found that the background noise levels were higher than the site noise levels produced at present and as predicted, and so overall the proposal is not considered to have an adverse impact in terms of noise. There were some concerns about the proposed Sunday operations, as mentioned previously, because that is generally a quieter day where there isn't much activity on the industrial estate itself and road noise is quieter. In addition, the noise survey didn't cover Sunday, so we didn't have any evidence to suggest that that would be acceptable, and so we have restricted operations on a Sunday. and there's a condition which restricts those hours. In terms of dust and air quality, I'll just move back to some images here. So a dust and air quality report has been submitted, which considered construction impacts, dust emissions from the site when it's in operation, and the impact of increased vehicle movements. Overall, it found the impact to be negligible. In addition, there's a dust and particle emission management plan, and that is required as part of the EA permit, and that controls, that sort of details how dust and emissions will be managed and monitored, essentially. Some of the mitigation measures which are employed within that management plan include materials arriving and leaving in covered vehicles, materials arriving having already been dampened down so that when they are deposited onto the site, there isn't dust emitting from those. It also includes details of dust suppression measures through water jets. This image here is an example of that. So there's a range of water cannons around the site. So the blue circles that you can see on there are the static water cannons. They have 20-metre jets, essentially, so they cover a distance of 20 metres, also including in height. And the purple ones are mobile water cannons, so they can be moved around as required. So the material is dampened down to ensure that dust is suppressed, essentially. Roads are dampened down and swept, and there's monitoring of dust and particulate matter in line with that document, which is part of the EA permit. In terms of odour, an odour assessment has been submitted. That included 3 field surveys carried out over 14 locations, and all showed a negligible risk of odour to nearest sensitive properties. This is also a matter that's covered by the EA environmental permit. In terms of water and drainage, the site and the new site comprises impermeable hard standing. The water drains from the sites into lagoons. So there is a lagoon serving the phase 1 development and a lagoon serving the phase 2 development. Essentially, the water drains to those areas, and then it's then recirculated through the water cannons and to the dust suppression measures. The capacity of the lagoons is large, but if in the event that there needs to be, in the event of sort of excess rainfall, where those lagoons could fill up, there is a permit from the EA to discharge to the existing watercourse for the site, the blue area of the site, and the lagoon in the yellow area of the site will discharge to the sewer via agreement with Yorkshire Water. In terms of highways, the greatest impact will be the increase in HGV movements from delivery and collection of materials. A transport assessment's been undertaken, and it's been undertaken in line with a worst case scenario, because at present the HGVs arrive and deposit materials, but approximately 25 of those vehicles then take the aggregate away from the site. So there are some linked trips. The transport assessment has assessed a worst case scenario where all movements are individual, so there's no backhauling, and it assesses that there could be up to an additional 100 vehicle movements per day via HGVs. In terms of the impact of that on the existing highway, it's considered that the highway has capacity to deal with those additional movements, and there have been some junction improvements at the Clay Wheels Lane junction with Penistone Road, and there's the capacity within that junction to accept those movements. There's also a condition requiring some improvements to this cycle route which goes along Clay Wheels Lane. At the moment, the cycle route crosses quite close to the junction with Clay Wheels Lane, and so in order to allow there to be greater breathing space between the crossing of the cycle route and the road and the increase in HGVs, a condition has been attached to move that cycle route to approximately 50 metres up the road so that they're crossing before the junction. In terms of B and G, the proposal is to improve the woodland which is the green area around the edge of that site, and the calculation shows that there will be an improvement of over 10% there. The application has had 62 letters of objection and an e-petition with 67 signatures. And I just draw members' attention to the supplementary report, which includes some amended and additional conditions. So I'll just run through those really briefly. So in relation to condition 2, which is the approved documents, a new document has been added to that, which is the floor plan for the new building. In relation to condition 5, which is the highways improvement condition, that's been slightly reworded and the changes are highlighted in bold. In terms to condition 6, the noise validation condition has been slightly reworded. There's also additional condition for stockpile monitoring and management to ensure that the heights of the stockpiles are monitored regularly and managed so that they don't exceed the proposed 12-metre height. And there's also an additional condition for a construction environmental management plan for the construction of the new building. There's also been an additional representation received. To summarise that, it discusses the fact that they consider the breach of conditions has been used to justify the stockpile increase in height. They consider that there's been no independent verification of the environmental statement documents and that those documents don't include a cumulative impact assessment of the impacts. They also suggest that these air quality report is inadequate and there's been poor public consultation. In response to the issues raised, the majority of these have been considered in the officer report. Just to cover a few points in a little bit more detail. In relation to the stockpile height reference in the report, which references the stockpiles heights as they are now, that's not been used to justify the impact of the increase to 12 metres. It's merely been set out to allow understanding of the actual visual impact of the increase in the height in comparison to existing, so that members can understand what that would look like in theory. All the technical reports have been assessed by the council's officers who are experts in their field, so the Environmental Protection Service and air quality officers, for example. And the reports consider the existing situation in terms of all impacts from in the area, and then they add the proposed impact from this development in. So in that respect, it considers everything that is going on in the area at the moment. And we've considered the concerns about the air quality report, and we consider that all sensitive receptors have been adequately assessed. And that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. We've got two speakers who want to make their representations today. We've got Chris Rowan, who is objecting, and Jane Newman, who is the agent for this application, will be speaking in support, and I will take the objector first. Chris, please come to the chair and the microphone, or the desk and the microphone, and you have up to 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you. There's one thing I want to correct in the report. It says that residents were moved into the locality knowing that there was a major UCAR site, which is true, but at the time, potential residents were assured by Councillor Arthur Dunworth that the UCAR site was going to be developed into residential housing. There was going to be a bridge over the Don, and it would be channelling traffic away from Hillsborough and onto Penistone Road. So I know that hasn't happened, but it's not true that we knew that UCAR was going to be there. It was an industrial site. We were sure that it wasn't going to be. The competitor site to Blue Phoenix in Nottinghamshire, that is sited in the middle of nowhere, sparsely populated, flat farmland. Nearest residential cluster of properties is 600 metres away. It's certainly miles away from other dust emitters, and it's not sited downwind and down valley of major conurbations such as Hillsborough, Wind Gardens, Wadsley, Foxhill, up the hill. It's perverse that the applicant's long-standing and documented breaches of current planning conditions, and I hear what you say about it's been purposely let go higher so you could see what it looks like, but they've breached those conditions previously on other occasions. And that's been passively referenced as a reason to approve the increased stockpiles. I mean, can it be true that repeated non-compliance is not grounds for enforcement, but instead of a platform for expansion? Rewarding this behaviour undermines public confidence in planning control and emboldens future disregard for constraints. The report downplays concerns raised by over 60 objectors. It minimises the ecological harms raised by Natural Inland and the Woodland Trust. It ignores the operator's history of failing to comply with high conditions, and it makes no reference to any enforcement action taken in the past. It misses the impact on the city's zero CO2 targets and the low emission zone initiative. If the council is unwilling or unable to enforce existing constraints, why should residents believe new ones will be respected? The report includes many assumptions and enforcement buck passing to the Environment Agency. Everybody knows the A is being hollowed out and it's incapable of even enforcing regulations about how much raw sewage is pumped into our rivers. So what chance is there with something esoterical as this? I don't care what dust management plans are in place. Our homes, our windowsills, cars, furniture, washing, any horizontal surface always have a layer of dust. You clean it off and it comes back. With Hague's aggregate operation just along Clay Wheels Lane, to be fair, it might not all be coming from Phoenix, but who in this system takes an overall view of the cumulative impact? Allowing this massive as-is expansion cannot improve this blight on the local community. The premise that this is an established waste processing site does not mean the original approval was sound. Approving this expansion compounds a flawed decision. The assertion that IBA is non-hazardous is in the same category that burning trees to generate electricity is environmentally friendly. We all know it isn't, and the truth about IBA is slowly emerging. The future will show how harmful this stuff is. Local residents overwhelmingly object to this expansion, but the reason I object is because the operator shows contempt and disdain for the local community by failing to employ best available techniques, i.e. totally enclosing the stockpiles. This is not an industry, it's a scavenging operation. It's only economically viable because of tax incentives and some say questionable science. And as such, they are proposing to do just enough to meet the bare minimum. Is this good enough for the people of Sheffield? Their original submissions and proposals had to be seriously beefed up to pass muster, not the characteristics of a considerate neighbour. Impact on property prices cannot be used as an argument for objecting, so why should economic arguments be allowed to avoid best solutions to minimise neighbour impact? This proposal seeks to substantially expanding a polluting process which emits recognised hazardous material to adjacent residential areas, ancient woodland, community green spaces. It brings negligible economic benefit to the city. Despite this sensitive context,
you have 20 seconds.
The recommendation overlooks, even dismisses, legitimate community and health community concerns. The local community are confident the good members of the planning committee will demand better than bare minimum. From a very wealthy company with deep pockets, approval should only be granted with constraints to enclose open-air stockpiles, employing best available techniques and operating hours restricted to as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'll leave officer comments till after Jane Newman's come to the table to put her case for the application.
Thank you. The Blue Phoenix site in Sheffield has been operating since 2008. The site has been successful and has evolved and expanded since that time. The site employs local people who live within a few miles of the site, some cycling to work. The proposed use is in line with policy and is a suitable use of an area of underused land surrounded by other industrial uses that has no electricity supply and because of past uses is not suitable for housing. You visited the site yesterday and I can confirm that the processing plant was operating at the time that you visited and the site was fully operational. Blue Phoenix operates nationally. They process incinerator bottom ash to make aggregates and remove metals for reprocessing. This reduces the need for quarrying of minerals. Incineration should only be used to deal with residual waste that cannot be dealt with through recycling, and as you know, local authorities have set targets to ensure that incineration is not the default option for waste disposal. However, where waste cannot be recycled, incineration is a viable option to dispose of residual wastes. If the resulting ash is not reprocessed into aggregates and metals, it is disposed of to landfill, which is the end of its life and uses landfill capacity that should be retained for waste that cannot be disposed of differently or reused. Prior to submitting the application, we carried out a public consultation event advertised with a drop of 500 leaflets to local residents and businesses and newspaper adverts. The event was attended by 20 local residents across 3 days. Feedback we received was taken into account. For example, it influenced the location of noise monitoring. Blue Phoenix are keen to be a good neighbour, and the site manager spoke to several attendees and invited them to contact him in the event of any operational concerns. He is here today with his assistant site manager and the UK board director to show their support for this business critical proposal and to answer any queries you might have. Prior to submitting the application, no complaints were made about noise or the appearance of the site. An odour complaint made to the council was not reported to the site because odour was not found to be a nuisance by the council. No enforcement action has been taken. We accept that stockpiles of aggregate product have exceeded the current permitted limits. This has arisen because of the current economic situation and slow growth in the construction sector, factors which were not anticipated when the first application was made prior to the market crash in 2008. We consider compliance is important, and the current application has been designed to address this issue. The proposal provides greater scope for storage, with around double the current floor space while increasing throughput by 50%. This gives greater flexibility in stocking areas to ensure that the height of material can be kept to permitted limits. It also allows Blue Phoenix to bid for contracts from new sources and to keep the material separate as required by the Environment Agency. We do not wish to diminish the lived experience of local residents, and we accept that being able to see an industrial site and the steam arising from the material can give rise to concerns about the development and potential impacts. However, planning applications must be determined on the basis of policy and factual reports which use scientific methods to properly evaluate the potential impacts of the development. As the Planning Officer's report sets out, the air quality and dust emissions from the proposed development are demonstrated to be within acceptable levels for all sensitive receptors. The background noise levels of the general noise environment have been measured at homes and other sensitive receptors. The noise levels here are within the levels that national policy says are acceptable for these receptors. Noise from the existing development has been measured and is below background noise levels at sensitive receptors. This means that the general noise environment of traffic and other land uses is louder than the noise generated from the existing site at homes and other receptors. In order to predict the level of noise from the proposal, a model has been produced based on topography and the baseline of the current noise environment. This is the accepted methodology for predicting noise levels. The noise modelling proves that the proposed development will also not be audible above other noise in the environment. Your Environmental Health Officer is content that this conclusion is robust. A condition is proposed requiring that the building is tested prior to being brought into use to absolutely ensure that noise arising will not cause harm to residents and other sensitive receptors, and this is acceptable to my client. The site is not in the green belt, and officers conclude that the proposal does not have an unacceptable impact on the green belt. The proposal is in line with your policies, and the application demonstrates that there is no harm to the environment or amenity arising from the scheme, which outweighs national and local policies. As set out in the officer's report, the development can be controlled by planning conditions, and it is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. You had 40 seconds to spare. And I thank you for that. Sarah, do you want to respond to either of the speakers' comments?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just make a couple of points there. So in relation to the issues regarding enforcement, I understand that it's frustrating for local residents that it seems in particular with regards to the stockpiles that they are in excess of the approved heights. We are aware of this and there is an open enforcement case. However, that case has been held in abeyance pending the outcome of this application, and we're required to take a proportionate response to enforcement inquiries. And when we are assessing the possibility of the acceptability of the increase in height, it wouldn't be logical to take enforcement action against that increase in height until this application has been determined, essentially. In relation to dust, I think Mr. Rowan suggested that that there was dust at present in the houses. However, it is difficult to say where that is coming from. It can't necessarily be attributed to this site. There are a lot of industrial uses within the area that it could also be coming from. And as detailed, there are measures in place here to suppress dust, so it's questionable as to whether the dust is coming from that site. In relation to IBA and it being a hazardous material, the environmental permit states that the site is able to accept non-hazardous IBA. So the material that comes to site isn't classed as hazardous, in line with that environmental permit. And further, just to highlight paragraph 201 of the MPPF, which states that when there is an alternative regime for assessing things such as pollution, that planning shouldn't focus on that, and that it should defer to those alternative processes for those pollution control measures, which in this case would be the environmental permit. And then lastly, there was a question as to why the existing materials couldn't be enclosed within buildings to reduce their impact. And just in regard to that, I'd like to point out that really we are only assessing what's in front of us, so they are applying for these external storage of materials, and that is what we are assessing rather than what could be done as an alternative.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to open it up to members' questions. And I've got three of you down so far, four. So that's Nikki, Mark, Henry, and then Cliff. So, Nikki.
Thank you, Chair. A bit like the previous item that was discussed, often people's objections are rooted in a sort of lack of trust or faith that things are going to be enforced. And I can appreciate, given that it was meant to be a certain height, the stockpile, and it was more than that, that even looking at those images of what it will look like, that people may not believe that is actually what it could look like. So I just wondered if you could say a bit more about the enforcement process that was started, and in terms of the timeline with the planning application. And so was the enforcement process started before they put it in, or was it triggered by the planning application?
I don't actually have that detail of the timeline in front of me, unfortunately, but I don't necessarily think that that would be determinative to what we're assessing today.
Thank you. Just to follow up, to help deal with that issue, you have this additional condition about the bi-monthly monitoring and reporting of stockpile heights. It says that if there was any breach, the local planning authority, i.e. Sheffield Council, should be notified and immediate action taken to reduce it. So I just wanted a bit more detail about how that would work, who's doing the monitoring, and who then notifies the council, who's responsible for that.
Okay, so the condition requires details of the methodology, so that will be submitted via condition. So in order to discharge this condition, the applicant will be required to provide us with details of a methodology of how they would monitor and report on this. And I can't say what those details will be at present, but obviously they would need to monitor it to check the height of it. And again, the second part of that, which requires the local planning authority to be notified and the action to be taken, again, that would be something which would come within that discharge of conditions application. So the detail would be submitted, we'd assess it, and when we were happy with that information, we would approve that, and then there would be that process in place to ensure that those stockpiles were essentially retained at or below 12 metres high.
Just to follow up, so is it likely that it would be down to the company to survey it and decide how high they are, or is it an independent body that comes in and does that?
It would be down to the company to survey it.
Thank you. Just a couple of additional questions. Just wanted clarity. I got a bit confused about the operating hours. So are they extending or just shifting the operating hours in the proposal?
So they are extending by 1 hour on Monday to Friday. So at the moment it's 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. and they want 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. So it's an additional hour Monday to Friday. And then they are shifting on a Saturday to be everything start and finish an hour earlier. So at the moment it's 8 till 5 and they want it 7 till 4 on a Saturday.
And the HGV movements will mirror that as well during the week?
That's correct, yeah.
And are they suggesting that the expansion of their work, so dealing with more of this material, that it can only happen if there are those extended hours?
I assume that that's the case, yeah.
Right, thank you. Let me just double check I've got all my points. I suppose because I don't want to come in later, my only comment, which is to people who do consultations, is in this day and age, 500 flyers isn't probably the most effective way, and targeted Facebook adverts don't cost very much.
Yeah, are you making a comment, or are you?
Comment, sorry,
We'll
but it's
leave
because I
that
didn't
to
want to come in
later, if
later.
that's all right with you, and move on to Mark. Next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I say thank you to the speakers for doing very well presented presentations there. I am particularly concerned about the references to the dust. Now, we've heard that sound receptors have been placed around the place. Presumably these weren't capable of detecting dust. Would it not be possible, if the production of dust originating from this site is disputed, then perhaps it would be wise to prove that the dust is not originating from this site, or it is originating from this site, by having dust receptors placed around the site. When we had the site visit yesterday, we did see quite a bit of steam rising from the piles. The steam can contain particles of dust, so it's possible, can they not? I mean, do you not agree that steam can contain particles of dust? Could that still be a place where dust originates from? You know, in short, can we sort out the dust issue? Thank you.
So I'm not an expert in the properties of steam and its ability to contain dust, but perhaps it could. But essentially, the EA permit requires monitoring of dust and emissions, dust and particle emissions. The permit requires sort of daily visual monitoring to see what, is dust falling on surfaces, but also more technical monitoring done using technical equipment and by an external company to monitor the emissions in terms of what's going into the air. So I think, given that there's those in place and that they are controlled through separate legislation, I think that we would be comfortable with from the planning aspect, and we shouldn't really consider that further.
Henry.
Thank you, Chair. I had quite a few questions, but you'll be relieved to hear that the officers addressed most of them already, so that leaves me with the report says that the new building will have fabric first principles, so it's likely to have some insulation that would help attenuate any noise produced within the building. Would it be reasonable to condition that it must have some insulation in it, rather than rely on a likelihood? That's the first one.
Is that in terms of its sustainability benefits or in terms of noise?
I don't personally see a big environmental benefit in heat insulating a building full of warm ash. So I think the insulation would be mainly for the sound benefit.
I don't necessarily think that it's necessary, because the noise report does consider the noise climate after the building has been developed and before. And as highlighted, the existing noise climate is dominated by other noise, and the noise produced by this site is below those background noise levels. So to require additional noise insulation for something that we don't consider to actually be an issue wouldn't seem reasonable. Also, there's a noise condition requiring validation. So we would test that the measures set out in the noise report and the kind of predicted sound levels have been achieved, and that's via a condition.
In terms of the lagoon, it sounds bad that the existing lagoon discharges into the River Don by taking the Environment Agency wouldn't have granted a permit if it was discharging something hazardous into the River Don. With the new lagoon discharging into a combined sewer, and as mentioned, our combined sewer is already suffering a lot of breaches during storm events, is it going to increase the likelihood of that sewer then discharging into the River Don?
Good question. We can only really assess what we've got in front of us. So in terms of the existing river discharging into the Don, yes, that's covered by a permit, which would consider, what actually was in that water going into the Don. The lagoon does have 2 catch pits and a hydrocarbon petrol filter, essentially, to sort of clean the water that's going in there to a certain extent. And then I believe that it's monitored as well, what's discharging into the river. In terms of the proposed lagoon discharge, that would be really for Yorkshire Water to control, and I believe that they haven't objected to that. And that's what's set out and proposed. If an alternative was proposed, then again, that would be subject to agreement with the Environment Agency, and again, would be subject to monitoring of what was actually in that water that was going into the river.
And last one. This is a big increase in HGV traffic. I'm assuming that without those extended hours, the site's not going to be able to process that extra 100,000 tonnes a year that they're projecting. And we've exhausted possibilities for reducing the HGV traffic by having more vehicles entering and leaving full.
We haven't asked that specific question. We've only really assessed what's been asked of us in terms of the HGV movements, although it does sound quite a lot. In terms of the impact on the junction, there is capacity for that, and what's been modelled is a worst case scenario as well.
Thanks.
Cliff.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think much of what I wanted to question, Mark has already raised with regard to the dust, but I am concerned about how much is there that residents are suffering at present, and where it's coming from, and to make the point about it being non-hazardous. I mean, if I chuck a bit of asbestos into my black bin, it's going to end up coming out the bottom of the incinerator, isn't it? It's not going to burn. And so there could be asbestos in there. Hopefully not much, if people behave themselves. But I just wanted to raise that.
So in terms of how the IBA actually is processed, what happens is it comes from the incinerators, and then it comes to site, and it's deposited on the site. But when it comes out of the incinerator, it's tested, and to see what's in it, essentially, because the site can't accept non-hazardous waste. So it's tested, it's deposited on site, and then that testing is sent off to the lab, and they analyse what's in the material. If there are hazardous materials in it, then they return it, essentially. So they don't accept it. In addition to that, as mentioned, the site is sealed, so there's nothing leaching into the soil because it's an impermeable concrete surface, so there's nothing leaching into the soil. And there are measures and controls through the EA permit, again, which sort of control those emissions to sort of water and air and general pollutions.
Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think some of my questions have been answered, but I just wanted to refer you to the bottom of page 96. And it says, IBA contains heavy metals such as lead, cadmium and mercury, as well as dioxins and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, not for me to say, all of which are hazardous to human health and the environment. These substances can leach into the soil and water, potentially contaminating local ecosystems entering the food chain. And I know Henry has already mentioned the river, but just bear in mind that in recent years, our rivers have been cleaned up and we have salmon back in the rivers. So I'm a bit concerned about, and I understand you said that the EA would monitor this. I want to be certain that no contaminated water would enter into the river. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, can you just refer me to where you said that was? Thank you. So that's something that's come in through representations. When the IBA comes to site, there is some metal in it, and that's extracted through the processing and recycled. Again, as mentioned, the site, the surface is impermeable, so there won't be any leaching of water through an impermeable surface, and then the water then drains into this lagoon. On some occasions, it may discharge to the river, but again, that's with an EA permit, who are the experts in controlling what is going into that river and giving permission for it. So it's really within their domain to agree to that and to monitor that, rather than that be something that we can control and monitor.
Nikki, you have a further question, and then I'll go to Marianne.
Just going back to the height of the stockpiles and the condition that's been drafted to monitor that, is it reasonable to amend that condition so that it's an independent organisation that carries out the checks, and also that there is a stated time scale by which that has to be reported to the council?
The condition asks for a methodology. So I suppose it would be presumptuous to perhaps assume that the company couldn't come up with a methodology. I suppose what I'm trying to say is we will see what is submitted, and if we think it's acceptable, then we would agree to it. If we don't, and we think that something more detailed is needed that would perhaps involve an external body, then we can ask for that. But I think I wouldn't want to stipulate it in the condition, because they may come up with a methodology that seems perfectly sound and reasonable.
So they could come up with a methodology which is sound and reasonable, which I suppose I don't see what harm there is in being specific, given that there is a lack of trust, given that they've been allowed to let their stockpiles go over the agreed limit. I mean, yes, I would hope that they would put forward something that says we'll go to this person who's trusted and they will do it. But again, just in terms of sort of restoring people's faith in the planning system, it would be good to stipulate that, and if they do it, fantastic, then you don't have to. But if they're just saying, well, we're going to measure it, people need some faith in that, particularly given that it hasn't been the enforcement process. They haven't seen a result from that before.
I think I've been nominated. Yeah, as you're aware with conditions, again, I'm going to mention the 6 tests, and obviously one of those is about it being reasonable. I totally understand what you're saying, but I think what the planning officer is saying, that there are other ways of providing some sort of assurance in this process. For example, you know, obviously not being an expert in anything like this, but obviously photographs and the relative position of the pile compared to the buildings would provide you with some sort of assurance as to how high they are, and you could actually see the differences there. So in terms of the methodology that may be provided, I think it's quite reasonable for the LPA to try and get some sort of additional assurance that what they're saying is true, with some sort of documentary evidence, which could be in the form of photographs, for example. But in terms of whether it's reasonable or not to put the applicant to additional cost, that a different methodology might provide the same, similar level of assurance. You know, I think that's in terms of those 6 tests and whether it's reasonable or not. It's reasonable to see a methodology and make sure that the LPA is confident that they're not just, you know, going to submit the same 11 metres each time. There's going to be some sort of process whereby they'll be more assured that that is actually the case.
You go and have a think, Nikki. Marianne.
Thank you. Just two quick ones, hopefully. So the speaker mentioned an interesting point about cumulative impact and who takes account of this. So in this new condition, the second one, there's a requirement for a environmental management plan. Will that include a cumulative impact assessment? So by that I mean not just assessing the impacts of this proposed development, but taking into consideration all the other known impacts, vibration, dust, air quality, etc.
So that condition that you referred to really relates to how the new element of the development, so essentially the new building, will be constructed, and it's putting best practice into place to ensure that that building process is acceptable in terms of noise, dust, emissions. So it doesn't relate to kind of the overall operation and processing of the site.
So is there anywhere a proposal for a cumulative impact assessment?
So we've assessed all material considerations and all material impacts in terms of amenity, so for example noise, odour, dust, air quality. We've assessed those individually. Reports, technical reports have been submitted and they've been assessed by our consultees, internal consultees, and all of those reports find those the impacts on those elements to be negligible. So from our point of view, we find it acceptable in relation to each of those elements, and I would struggle to understand a report that sort of, well, I suppose what we're doing is drawing it all together. You know, we're looking at all of those elements and understanding if there is an impact, and each of those identifies a negligible impact, and therefore we've concluded that it's acceptable overall.
So you look at them in the round anyway?
Well, we look at each one and consider if there's an issue, but if they're all negligible, it's hard to see how, you know, we could draw that there would be an issue from those.
I think, sorry, I was just going to say, I mean, you're right, they are in the round. I mean, air quality tests don't just focus in on dust from that site. It looks at the air, the quality of the air generally. It can't pick out which particles come from this site and which particles come from the neighbouring site. So it will all be a cumulative assessment in any case. As with noise won't just take into account noise from the site. It takes into account noise from the surrounding area.
Okay, thank you. And just another quick one. Page 101, there was a comment from SIMCA, the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, which says any development should ensure that the active travel network is not negatively impacted. At page 110, it refers to a condition which, with relation to previous application, which I think was last year. I just wondered, is there any progress on that condition being fulfilled? Has any work started on it? It's with regards to the pedestrian and cycle path.
No, I don't believe that work has commenced yet, but we have added a separate highways improvement condition to secure the element of that approval which relates to the cycle improvements. Which is essentially at the moment the cycle path ends and crosses over the road in very close proximity to the junction with this industrial estate, and it's proposed to move that further up the road, further up Claywheels Lane, so that there's more separation between the cycles entering the highway essentially and crossing over away from that junction, and we have secured that through the highway improvements condition.
So that makes a slight change to the original condition if we approve this one today.
There is a slight change to it in the supplementary, yes. Yeah.
Nikki, you wanted to come back with one more question, your third bite of the cherry.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated. Just going back to the stockpile heights, and I take what you're saying about, you know, officers will make sure there is a good system in place. I suppose it's just not helped with the wording of what's... It says it will be monitored, and only in the event of a breach will the planning authority be told there's been a breach. So no news is good news. And I suppose it's just that, how do we know that for sure? Can we assume if we've not been told anything that everything's going fine? Who makes that judgment, I suppose? If we're leaving it just to them to make the judgment, given that people haven't got much faith in them because of the previous breaches of the height of the stockpiles, it feels to me that actually it is reasonable to ask for some detail about, or to empower you as officers to make sure that there is some check, that we're just not waiting to be told when something bad's happened, but we are reassured that there's a monitoring process that is fair and that maybe has some checks and balances on it so that people locally believe in it.
Okay, thank you. I understand your point, and it's a fair point. So, yeah, the condition asks for bi-monthly monitoring, but it doesn't explicitly ask for that to be submitted to us, only in the event that there's a breach that we would be involved. So it would seem reasonable to add somewhere in there a requirement for them to submit a monitoring report at a specific period. I think bi-monthly would be very excessive. I would suggest perhaps annually would be more appropriate, so that every year they have to submit details of what that bi-monthly monitoring has found.
It still doesn't give the reassurance that when the bi-monthly monitoring happened, it was fair. But I appreciate what you said before, that you will try and make sure there is a way of ensuring that it is fair. Because actually, that wouldn't, well, I suppose there's also the point about, at the moment, it says that immediate action must be taken when there's a breach. What it doesn't say is when the local planning authorities should be notified. I mean, I know it says bi-monthly, but within a certain amount of time. I'm just thinking, again, if people have bad faith in people to deliver on what's expected of them, you can imagine you'd leave a certain gap after something had happened, so that by the time you were asked to fix it, the situation had changed. And I know this sounds really picky, but it is just from listening to people's frustrations in this case and others about not believing that enforcement actually makes a difference and is followed through properly.
Okay, so we could be more specific in relation to the immediate action. We could put a time frame in there for the action to be taken. But the reporting, so I still think annual would be reasonable, but I do wonder whether we could add in there something along the lines of that the monitoring is made available for inspection if required. So if we get an enforcement inquiry saying that we think the stockpiles are higher, we've put that in the condition. We could approach the company and say, can you show us your monitoring? That could be added in to provide that little bit of comfort, perhaps.
Can I just, before you jump back in, Nikki, I think the agent wants to respond to the monitoring query that you've raised. Sorry, before you...
Sorry, Chair. We don't usually allow speakers to come back unless somebody asks a question that somebody thinks they could be helpfully put their hands up. It's just not common practice, that's all, Chair.
The members happy for the agent to respond on that point?
If one side is speaking, the other side should be allowed to speak as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to go with that, Jane.
Chair, can I just take the opportunity, given the conversation that we've had? I think what's being discussed at the moment is a potential amendment to a condition. And I think there's currently 3 elements that have been discussed, and I think that is the submission of the monitoring information. I think that was annually. I think then there was also when we should be notified of a potential breach. And there was a third thing that I can't quite remember now. It's about making it available on request. Thank you, Councillor Belfield. So I think those are the 3 potential amendments that have been discussed. Obviously, in the usual course of events, that would need to be proposed, seconded, and then voted on. Thank you, Chair.
So you're proposing that then, Nikki? Can I have a seconder for that proposal?
Are we adding final wording to be agreed with?
just in terms of that, at the moment, obviously, we're talking about that. I think the proposal has been that the submission is annual. I don't think a proposed timeline for being notified has been mentioned yet. And obviously, how that request mechanism would work, obviously, that's something that's been discussed. So I think Dem Services is right to just say that the final details of that to then be approved by the co-chairs. Thank you, Chair.
Do we now hold that just to one side, because I'm aware that I've still got Gary who wants to ask a question, and then some point soon after maybe we'll be moving to members' comments. You never know.
Sorry, can I just ask who seconded that? Thank you.
We had Alan and Gary's hand went up as well, so that was well covered. Okay, so we could come back to that nearer the time when we're about to before we make a decision. Okay. Gary, you have a question.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And a little bit of what you've been saying, Nick, I think you're absolutely right. So I think it should be every 3 months. It's got to be quarterly. You know, because the applicants already said, or the agents already said that, you know, they knew they were stockpiling over what they were out for, if I've heard it right. And who says this is not going to just go over again? So, I mean, what really should happen on site, really, if they know they're actually breaching something, they should stop recycling, so they got rid of what they've already stockpiled. Now, in my opinion, I mean, that's not going to work because it's a business, isn't it? That's what you're going to say, I'm sure.
Well, if they're in breach of the condition, then yes, they should be making arrangements to reduce those stockpiles. However, they choose to do that.
Are they in breach at this moment in time?
They are in breach at this moment in time, but we have not taken any action because we've got this application in front of us which proposes to increase the height to 12 metres, and we considered that it was reasonable to allow the consideration of that extra height before we decide whether to take enforcement action, essentially.
Before I bring Cliff in, I did ask a question yesterday, so only some of the members heard the answer when we were on the site visits, and that relates to how that condition of 8 metres came about, whether it was to do with amenity or whether it was to do with health and safety. So could you shed some light on that, because I think that might help.
So the previous approval allowed stockpiles of up to 8 metres, and that was simply because that was what was proposed, and I assume that was calculated by the applicant at that time as necessary, and it would allow them to function in the way that they needed to get the correct throughput. So now we're looking at 12 metres because that's what's been requested. So there was no particular reason previously as to why the 8 metres was conditioned, other than that's what was proposed and assessed. And similarly here, that's what's proposed and is being assessed.
Thank you, Sarah. Cliff, you have a question.
Yeah, sorry to come back to this dust thing again. If dust is a problem at present, and it could be a problem in the future, what recourse do residents have? Just put my mind to rest, please, so that if we do pass this, that we know that if it's a real issue, that you know, can it, you know, it's obviously, you know, they feel it's an issue, but you know, how significant it is. Is there any way? Is there any recourse? Can they appeal to some agency which would get it assessed and then get controls put in place?
So, as mentioned previously, it's not clear if dust is coming from this site because there's a lot of other uses in the area as well. In terms of kind of if dust is a problem, the dust and emissions management plan, which is an EA document, does include in there information of how to deal with complaints. So if there is a complaint, there's a process then for what that triggers and how that is dealt with, and what measures are put into place as a result of that. So I think that again is controlled through that EA permit and that separate legislation.
So complaints would have to go to the Environmental Agency, not to council officers then?
There is a process within that dust and particulate management plan about how those complaints would be dealt with, and they may go directly to the applicant, or they may go through to the EA, but there is a process for how those complaints are dealt with.
Thank you, that clears that up. Before we do, I'd like to ask what weight we can allocate to Councillor Dungworth's promise some years ago that this site was going to be used for another purpose.
I have no knowledge really of that conversation that took place at that time. All we can consider is the planning designation that we've got on the site at the moment, which is a general industry area, and assess the application in relation to material planning considerations and relevant policy that we've got in front of us at this time.
I do have one more question, and that relates to the lagoon and the water supply to the lagoon. Could there be a scenario or situation where the lagoon has run dry and it can no longer feed the water jets to dampen down the dust?
I assume that could be the case, and in that instance that there would be an alternative water supply in place, because it's that dust suppression and those water jets are really very critical. So there would need to be an alternative method of using that dust suppression method.
Do we need to put that in? Would we have to put in an additional condition to make sure that safeguard is there?
The dust and particulate management plan requires the use of those water cannons, and I think that in itself, the requirement to use them is good enough regardless of where that water comes from.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, I will open it up to members' comments, and I've got Nikki first, then Henry, then Richard, then Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just to repeat the comment I had before, and it's probably a plea to everyone who does consultation of any form, that I think doing 500 leaflets isn't the best way for this kind of thing. Lots of people do not look at leaflets that come through their door. You can have targeted online advertising where you can see if people have actually read it, and you can target down to postcode level, and it's actually not that expensive.
I think it was stated earlier that other forms of media were used in addition to the 500 leaflets.
It would be reassuring to know a bit more about that. Just because one of the biggest complaints we get is that people didn't know about it, and given the tools that are available, and maybe they did, but it would be something useful to know as part of the report.
Henry.
Thank you, Chair. We shouldn't be asked to approve this recommendation because we shouldn't be having to expand our IBA processing requirements nationally. We should be much, much better at recycling before stuff gets into the incinerator. Unfortunately, that's not the situation we're in. And while we are sending so much of our rubbish into the incinerator on Bernard Road, it's highly lamentable that we're not able to process it as close as possible to that facility and instead drive it up and down in diesel wagons. That while we need to manage the waste we produce from the waste we're producing, I think we need to extend this facility. I'm satisfied that the management of the job they're doing is being done in an adequate sort of fashion, so I'll be voting for this, not because I want to vote for it, but because I think we need to own our stuff.
Something that wasn't mentioned in the presentation, but it also came up in the on the site visits yesterday, is that with the expansion of this site, it would be able to accommodate waste from the bottom ash waste from Bernard Road. Somehow I didn't hear it.
So it doesn't take the ash from Bernard Road at the moment. It's a commercial industry, so it would offer them the potential to bid for that contract, but there's no guarantee that would actually occur.
Thank you, Sarah. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have some grave reservations about this particular application. To me, it's a matter of scale. I think it's a tipping point. The gentleman there admitted that the factory was there before the residential, that I can't comment about, so promises made to you. But this factory wasn't there before the residents had their houses built, and I think that's quite important. I mean, we spent a lot of time as members talking about city goals, and part of the city goals was residents of Sheffield having decent places to live, decent places to bring up kids, decent places to grow old with. And I think this could potentially have a major impact on the residents. Wearing my Stannington ward hat of Wadsley Park Village, so I'm generally concerned about that. Just looking at some of the things, one thing that struck me is we talked about HGV movements. I've calculated, and it's an assessment, an estimate. On a Saturday, there will be an extra HGV, and I stress the word extra HGV, every 5 minutes, all day. Now that's got to have an impact somewhere. In the reports, it talks, one of the key phrases that is repeated time and time again is in the interest of the amenity of the locality and occupiers and adjoining property. And I've not seen a report with so many compliance conditions put in, so thank you for that. But my concern is that as a council, we have to be much more proactive in monitoring those conditions. We cannot, the point you've been making many times, Nikki, is we cannot rely on the applicant self-policing. Especially an applicant, and I'm not trying to say anything about them, who has image issues on some of the way it's behaved, and the point of the fact that we have a condition currently on 8-metre high stockpiling, which has been totally ignored. And I understand why you're not enforcing it, I fully get that. But it kind of creates a message in my mind. And which brings me to the next point, which is, I think 12 metres is far too high. And I would actually propose that is reduced to 10 metres. And if somebody's prepared to second me on that, I'd let that to go. I just think it's too... I don't see a rationale for it. They've got more land, therefore they don't need their stockpiles to grow up to meet the proportionate capacity of what they're trying to do here, if it is accepted. I just think that it needs to be a balance, and personally, I'm struggling with this one. I don't think the balance has been met, notwithstanding the excellent work by the officers, and absolutely no deliveries, HGV movements on a Sunday or bank holidays. Absolutely not. Thank you.
Well, we've ruled out Sundays and bank holidays. That is not in. We know that's what the applicant wants, but that is not in the officer recommendation. Can I take you back to your initial comments as a representative for Wadsley Park Village? If you are declaring an interest on that, then I must declare an interest that some of the Burley Car residents have also voiced a view.
I don't honestly believe that a member has an obligation to declare an interest on an application in the ward, unless they are materially been influenced by it or being involved in it. I mean, there's one coming up, I suspect, later, which I will have to declare an interest on. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have a certain degree of immunity on that.
Are you okay with that?
Just on the point of being a ward member, currently the Constitution doesn't prohibit you from taking part. Obviously, you need to be coming with an open mind. So if any of your considerations relate to the fact it's in your ward as opposed to being on the other side of the city, then I would say you're possibly not having an open mind on that matter. So that's sort of the main thing to bear in mind about what's being said there. Just pick up a little point on what you mentioned there, just to remind members that planning applications are to be considered applicant blind. So any previous behaviour of an applicant isn't something that you should be taken into consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. Mark.
Chair, just on what Richard said about the height, reduce it down to 8 metres. Stockpiling.
Well, it's to reduce it to 10, that can also be considered as an amendment to the application.
Like any amendment to a condition, members can propose and second and vote on it. Obviously, before that would happen, then I would suggest that members take the advice of the planning officer of the reasonableness of that proposed amendment, and possibly myself to remind you of the 6 tests as usual. Thank you, Chair.
I suppose my question back would be why 10 metres? So what kind of evidence and have you used to think that 10 metres would be okay but 12 wouldn't?
Well, that seems to be what they're operating to now.
But so I'll just take you back to the images that we've got of the proposed views. So these are the proposed views. So you can see from here, I'll focus on this one, but I'll look at the others as well, that actually the stockpiles are lower than the heights of the buildings, and actually the stockpiles are partially screened by those buildings as well. I suppose I just question whether it's reasonable or necessary to reduce that height to 10 metres when the context of that is an industrial area, the building scale is higher, they're partially screened. So I just question is it necessary or reasonable?
Well, the site's getting 50% bigger, so why go higher? You know, so that's just a simple question, isn't it? So just leave it at what it is.
I mean, I assume that the applicant has applied for the proposed stockpiles at that height because that's what they need to operate in terms of the throughput and the storage of the materials. So I assume that that's why they're proposing what they're proposing.
I mean, I can't possibly comment on what the applicant particularly has in mind, but I just think that it's just the overall presence of the new site is such that I think we should be trying to do more for the benefit of local residents to minimise the increase. And I think 10 seems to work now. Why can't we limit it to 10 metres? I mean, 12 is. I have no skill in know whether 12 is better or worse. It's higher.
One of the piles, one of the 2 piles, I think, is at 10.7 metres at the moment.
Yeah, the highest.
So it is actually over 10 metres.
The highest is at 10.7. I suppose my advice would remain that I don't really think it's necessary or reasonable given the evidence that we've got in terms of the visual impact. So my advice would be that we don't do that. I suppose I'd also highlight as well that if these stockpiles aren't increased, potentially there's a potential impact that either this material ends up going to landfill, because if there's not an increase in height and you can't store the material, then the alternative is, if it can't be dealt with elsewhere, that this ends up not getting processed. So I suppose that's just something to bear in mind as well.
So are you happy with the officers? Are you accepting of the officers' advice, I should say, rather than happy with the officers' advice?
Very reluctantly, unless my colleagues are prepared to speak on my behalf.
Well, let's put it to a vote. I said let's make a condition. We've got time to do it and put it to a vote. And if it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, we'll leave it there.
I was trying to establish where we are on this at the moment. Bear in mind that there's also another condition that we would want to look at later.
Chair, I'm not sure that you've got a proposal and a seconder there for something that's certain. I'm not sure what the height was that the members may sort of come to a conclusion on. But as you'll see from all the conditions, they all say why they've been put there. So in that respect, I would just ask, given the advice from the planning officer, and I'd reiterate that obviously the reasonable and necessary aspect are part of the 6 tests which are in the NPPF, just for members when they do propose and second with reference to the height, what they believe the reasons are for doing that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to take comment from Mark.
Right. Personally, I don't think the height of the piles is what strictly matters. But what I want to say is we committee members are supposed to come here, which we do, with open minds and be persuaded by the evidence that's set before us. Now, yesterday on the site visit, I must admit I was leaning towards thinking that the waste product being turned into something useful was a beneficial thing. But today we've heard strong evidence about the amount of dust from that local residents are experiencing. And I have no reason whatsoever to doubt their word about that. Now, we also, when we were at the site, those of us who were there saw the mechanism by which these dust particles can be distributed. In the steam, dust is transferred in steam. New evidence requires new thinking. So yesterday I may have been leaning towards it, now I'm leaning against it. Further controls on dust, or at least definite assessment on where the dust is coming from, will be necessary for me to approve this, and I rather think that should be done. Thank you.
Right, so we've now had a series of comments. Members can see the recommendation before us, and I'm mindful that there's another condition that was proposed earlier on. Two on the table. Yeah.
Can I just clarify, from my perspective, what I understand the position is? I believe Councillor Belfield has proposed an amended condition related to those three things, which I'm not going to try and reel off again. And we also confirm that if that were to go ahead from the members' vote, then the final wording would be agreed with the co-chairs. In respect of the other proposed condition, I think there likely is already a condition that limits the height to 12 metres. So I think what would be on the table, should it come forward, is a proposal to amend that to whatever the members say. As I say, I wasn't sure whether they come to a conclusion on what they were proposing. But I would ask members to, if the planning officer could see that condition, find the condition there in the report, there should already be a reason for why that condition is there. So it might be a good idea for members to review that reason and decide if that's, still the right reason for potentially lowering it to the height that members are potentially proposing and seconding and asking other members to vote on. Thank you, Chair.
Richard.
Sorry, just for reference, that is condition 19.
Yeah, I mean, with the proposal for the reduction from 12 to 10, I mean, I have to be consistent, and I've said several times today, we have to rely on the evidence from experts. I mean, 12 to 10, I have no empirical evidence that that's going to make a difference. Your comments to the fact that you're not going to be able to see it from a distance, I've listened to. On balance, will withdraw my proposal on that basis. If somebody else wants to take it up, that's fine, but I think Councillor Belfield's proposal is a far better one.
Is it possible to add something about dust assessment to the proposal?
You mean dust coming from this site?
Yes, to prove whether or not the dust is coming in. If we're already check that the dust is coming from this site.
Because I'm mindful that another firm has been named as a possible source, and we also know that from climatic weather events that dust can travel thousands of miles from the Sahara to the UK. So it's
So just as a reminder, the Dust and Particulate Management Plan, which is a document that's approved by the EA as part of their permit, requires monitoring of dust and particulates.
And also just a reminder that it is the Environment Agency that is the responsible body for regulating emissions.
Ask a question, Nikki.
Sorry. Do we know if the EA's monitoring includes what Mark has suggested, which is finding where dust has come from?
My understanding would be that the EA permit would just require the monitoring from this site, so it wouldn't go to whoever's saying they've got a problem and check where that dust is coming from in a wider context.
Perhaps also, sorry, worth saying that the air quality report that was also part of the submission does conclude that predicted impact on annual mean PM10 and PM2.5 concentrations are predicted to be negligible at all sensitive receptor locations. So they are locations beyond the application site, so typically homes.
We've been told it's not negligible. We've been told it's affecting the residents.
But the evidence submitted with this application in that dust and air quality assessment suggested that from this site it is negligible.
I think members will have to make up their own minds.
I just ask a question. Where did that come from, them statistics about the air quality?
There's a dust and air quality assessment submitted as a supporting document with the application.
And just to clarify, that is that carried out by an independent surveyor that the applicant has paid for?
Yes, that's an independent consultant who's carried out that work, and it's been assessed by our air quality officer as well internally.
Okay, do you think we're now at that point where we can take a decision on the application?
Chair, I'm not sure you've had a vote yet on Councillor Belfield's amendment. Thank you.
Right, and did we have a seconder for Councillor Belfield's? We did, that was Alan, yeah, and yeah, it came from elsewhere. So can we take a vote by a show of hands on that amendment? Those who are in favour, that is pretty solid. Happy to proceed to a vote on the application. Can I see all those in favour of the application? See all, you can drop your hands. Can I see all those against the application? That vote is carried on a majority vote. Thank you all very much for your time. We can now have a comfort break. Can people be back for 5 o'clock, please? 6 o'clock, so we will be understanding of that, as you have other people to see, unfortunately. So we will move on now to the Dore and Totley item, the tennis courts. That's on page 39 of the agenda. Sorry that we're jumping about all over the place with it, but it's been determined that that's the one that will be taken next. So I'm going to ask Chris to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just take you quickly through the presentation. So the tennis club is sandwiched between housing on Devonshire Road and Aberdale Park Rise, as you can see there. Don't take too much note of the slightly unusual red line for now. That's just simply the area of development, not the area of the site. It has 3 courts, which you can see there, and that highlights kind of perfectly its relationship to the housing within the area. The courts are currently non-illuminated, and they're prevented from being illuminated by a condition on the original approval in 2001, which granted planning permission for the creation of the tennis club. And the use of the pavilion is also tied in terms of hours of use, not specifically to hours, but to the hours of use or while ever play is taking place on the tennis court. So in other words, the pavilion shouldn't be open unless the tennis courts are and being used. The application is for 6 5-metre floodlight columns with 2 lights per pole on them. Each light is 300 watts, to try and give a bit of context to that. And the applicant proposes a 9 p.m. curfew for their use. Planning permission in terms of background was refused in 2012 for 8 9-metre columns, and again in 2013 for 8 9-metre columns with a curfew time of 10 p.m. That second refusal was actually appealed and was dismissed by the Planning Inspectorate. There's been mixed objection and support, quite a lot of both. Objections are based on loss of amenity for neighbouring residents in terms of light, noise and general disturbance associated with increased use of the facility. And loss of sort of the quiet time that they currently experience after dark. Support comes in the form of provides greater flexibility for people to play, particularly those who want to play after work, who currently can't, other than in very few months in the summer, and to maintain and support the viability and future of the club. The columns themselves aren't overbearing. I'll just, there's some reference in the objections to them being overbearing. I'll just flick through the sides a bit while I'm talking about this. They're lower than previously rejected and fewer, and they're also very narrow. They're only 100 millimetres wide, so as kind of structures, they're not particularly imposing or overbearing. They will result, though, in an increase in ambient. I seem to be having a bit of trouble with it. In ambient light, in what is otherwise a very low light environment. There's less lighting, fewer columns than previous schemes, but it's important to note that despite that, the lighting is designed to allow play on all 3 courts. So you can hopefully pick out on there the 6 columns that are sort of centrally located, spread out evenly around that central court. And the lighting is designed to achieve Lawn Tennis Association standards of play, which I presume is competitive on that central court. But that would also, there's enough light, that's a better image perhaps, enough light that would enable social play just between club members on a kind of casual basis on the courts either side. And I think that probably demonstrates that, with the red obviously being the central court. This Lux contour plan has been assessed by our Environmental Protection Service in terms of potential for light, not light pollution as such, but impact on neighbouring properties and potential for complaints. And they agree that the light spillage beyond the site is unlikely, in terms of downward light, is unlikely to be experienced, and therefore in that sense isn't harmful. But it would extend the periods of play, especially outside summer months, and the use of the pavilion and club generally, and create just a general presence of a significant light source at the end of everybody's garden during those periods. The houses are a reasonable distance away, but not extensively so, for that not to become a problem, particularly the property on the right there, which faces it at an angle. There is support, in general amenity terms, we consider that to be the problem, the impact on neighbours, both from the light and from the general disturbance that goes with that. People playing for longer when otherwise they might not have done. There is support in policy LR2 of the UDP and paragraph 103 of the MPPF for development that encourages opportunities for sport and recreation, and that's acknowledged. And the letters of support kind of reflect that. However, we think that overall the harmful effects and the site history with the appeal previously supported by the inspector and significant material considerations that outweigh those benefits, and therefore we're recommending refusal, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. I'll open it up to members' questions. Are there any? Gary, then Cliff, then Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the presentation, and I think it's just going to open the door, isn't it? Once you've put something like this, because it's low level and they can come back again and they've already got it, it's hard to turn it down. But can I just ask you how many, so I'll go back to the question, Chris. How many complaints have we had for artificial light nuisance complaints the council's received? Because this one, there's 15 people directly involved, and then it's the further afield. You know what I mean? So it's, I just wondered, have you got that information at hand? No.
I don't. I wasn't sure whether it was a question specifically with this site or generally with this kind of facility citywide, but I don't have that information, sorry.
Cliff?
Thank you, Chair. Can you just please clarify whether the light nuisance that surrounding houses would get, is it spill from the light itself, or is it reflection from the court?
It's the general lighting up of the area as opposed to spillage from the light source itself. If I've understood your question correctly, this diagram has been produced, which is a sort of a Lux contour map. That's been assessed by our Environment Protection Service, who agree that's a reasonable representation of what the downward light would create, and that doesn't therefore go beyond. Obviously, there might be some very minor spillage, but not significantly into neighbours' gardens to a degree that would be harmful. The concern is that it's above, a bit visible above these areas, you know, from bedroom windows, from lounge windows, etc., of those properties, from gardens if people are outside, if it's a warmer evening, and there's a very significant light source where otherwise there isn't. It's a low level environment in terms of light.
Okay, Richard.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies if it's in the report, but I couldn't see it. Is there currently any restriction on hours of playing? Subject obviously to darkness, but I'm thinking about in the summer, can they play till 9:30?
Yes, I believe that's the case. Yeah. The hours of use are currently unrestricted. I think I could do just checking that if you just let me pause for a moment. The pavilion can't be used when the courts aren't. That's the way that condition's drafted. I'm not sure it is in the report.
I think it's basically restricted by daylight hours.
I think it is, yes.
Yeah. Once you can't see the ball, then play becomes very erratic and then pointless, doesn't it?
I can't say that for certain, Chair, because I don't have it in front of me.
Chair, sorry, can I just ask the planning officer to look at page 48? I think just the paragraph above where it says lighting in the wide environment, it says, hence, despite the change of proposed curfew, is that relevant?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Oh, the penultimate paragraph on page 48. I think that's a reference to that is a reference to the previous proposal that proposed 8 9-metre columns with a curfew of 10 p.m. It's my understanding that it is just limited by daylight.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I'll open it to members' comments. Nikki.
I suppose the bit that I found interesting was about the promotion of, if you're improving current facilities, and that, you know, it's obviously a good facility, you sort of look at what else is around there. And I think it had been previously highlighted that there is, I think, 2 other clubs with under 3 miles away. It's also really close to Millhouses Park, where there's a public tennis court that can be booked. I suppose I just wanted to say I appreciate that running a community club is hard, but it does feel like it's not an addition to the area that's necessarily needed. Yeah.
Was that an argument for the recommendation then? Thank you. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I know the focus of this is very much about floodlighting and ambient lighting, etc., which will have an effect. I've seen this on the places. I think also the other side of it is the noise. Playing tennis isn't a noisy sport, but it's sufficiently noisy when it's, and this appears to be a very quiet sort of backland of people's gardens, and I think the noise is a significant impact on the amenity of the neighbourhood as the lights. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Making that a proposal. Harry.
Yeah, it's plain and simple, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, it's when your neighbour or somebody in your particular area has a barbecue one night and they're staying over till 10 o'clock at night and they've got the sound on and music playing and things like that. This is exactly going to be the same. You put lights on there, and it don't matter. You're still going to see that light coming across, and it's nice and dark. And then all of a sudden you got these lights going on, and it's disturbing your your time in your garden or in your house. So that I should be voting against it, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. Can I have that as a... Right. I'm going to propose the officer recommendation. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Gary. Okay. All those in favour of the officer recommendation?
That's unanimous.
Yep, that's unanimous. Thank you all, everyone. And we can now move swiftly on to application number 24-01921, full former garage site to the rear of 32 to 38 Meadow Head Drive, Sheffield 8. And that is on page 53. And it's back to you, Chris, for this one.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a site here on the screen. You can see it's it's in a housing area, entirely surrounded by housing. It was previously, you can see the brown rectangles on the plan in amongst the green. They were garages, I think about 16 in total, something like that, which have been derelict for a while and have since been removed. The proposals for 5 detached dwellings, each 4 bedrooms, and the proposal is for the site to be accessed between those 2 residential properties there, which is number 38 and 40 Meadow Head Drive. The access exists at the moment. It does currently also serve, you can't quite see it on there or there, but you will on the site layout plan. It does serve a garage at the back of number 38 that will remain, that access will remain. Otherwise, the access will be to the property, to the land there. You can see that it's heavily treed on that image. It is no more. The site was cleared, I'm not sure exactly when, but the last 12-18 months. There are still some trees on the site, but the majority of it is being cleared along with the removal of the garage block. Historically, there have been protected species on the site in the western corner, and I'll more about that in a moment. So planning permission for 4 bungalows was granted in 2014 in terms of context. That obviously wasn't implemented. It was an outline application. And there was a pre-application inquiry that preceded this particular application that was for a greater number of dwellings, and we advised that it was acceptable in principle, but that the numbers would likely need to be reduced to achieve appropriate amenity provision and to avoid things like protected species or other features on the site. We've had a good number of objections, which is why it's here, including a 42-person petition, and the objections have been about the design of the scheme, amenity, living conditions, ecological impact, site contamination and drainage. So I'll just quickly talk you through it. This is the access track looking down back towards Meadow Head Drive. Just to the left of the image is the garage that I referred to. You can see there that there's a splay in the access drive, which is useful in that it provides a passing place and ability for larger vehicles to get in and out. These are images of the site at the moment or a few months ago, and you can see there's relatively close proximity to existing dwellings. I believe that is on Meadow Head Drive, that property. These are just general images around the site. It's a bit of a mess at the moment, quite frankly. As you can see, there was a larger amount of vegetation on the site. This is Meadow Head Drive, which is where the access is immediately to the left of here. So it's a relatively narrow road, typically with drives, private drives and on-street parking at the same time. And that is the site layout. So you can see there that the 5 houses are detached in a fairly regular form. You can also see a blue line, sort of 2/3 of the way down the site. That is a small brook, which with it brings a flood zone 2 and flood zone 3 for a very small portion of the site. So the principles acceptable as housing area. We don't have a 5-year supply, remember, so the tilted balance is in play, and there has to be adverse impacts that significantly outweigh the tilted balance for us to recommend approval. Density is reasonably low, you'll be familiar with, and the report refers to a target range of 30 to 40 houses per hectare. This has 21, but that policy also allows for variations in that range where constraints or character of the area dictate. It's not visible from, or not hugely visible from outside the site, so it doesn't have a great impact on visual amenity of the wider area. The gardens on the top side are ever so slightly short of our normal guidelines, which are a guideline, they're not a minimum standard of 10 metres. They're at sort of 9.6, 9.4, which we don't consider to be significant. And the distance, importantly, between the properties from a window-to-window basis is more than the guideline of 21 metres. Around the rest of the site, the relationship to neighbours is such that the houses are so far away, apart from the bottom house on the right there, which is close to the neighbour's garden, but the garden is very long, so it doesn't have a significant impact on that in our view. There's a good standard of living accommodation provided for the occupants, good sized gardens, accommodation, outlook, etc. There aren't any significant highways issues. Each property has 2 spaces plus a garage, and there are visitor spaces as well. As I said at the beginning, 2 vehicles can pass reasonably comfortably within the passing space, and the fire authority are happy with it in terms of being able to service the site. Bin collections would take place from near the site entrance, so residents would take their bins down towards an allotted space close to the site entrance. The site has been cleared, as I said, and that, in terms of biodiversity net gain, isn't ignored. A developer doesn't get away with just clearing the site. The metric that is employed to determine what increases are necessary to achieve 10% takes account of what the site was like previously. And as you're aware, there's a need for a 10% gain. Because these are residential gardens, it's normal practice for that to be provided off-site via a mandatory condition that's applied to all planning permissions. And that's what's happening here. So the BNG is provided for within the consent. There was an ecology report that surveyed the site because we had knowledge of, it had that nature, but we had knowledge of the previous occupancy by protected species. And that, in the first instance, determined that the species were no longer there, and then subsequently that they'd been replaced by an alternative species, by foxes. There is, however, sufficient interest and concern that they may return, that there are conditions imposed to require pre-commencement resurveys and then appropriate licences to deal with any species that are found present before any work, which are obtained from Natural England, not from ourselves, before any work can commence. As I said, there's localised flood zone 2 and 3 in the bottom of the site, but the flood risk assessment demonstrates quite comfortably that that is dealt with by raising the floor levels of those 2 plots in the bottom corner, plots 4 and 1 and 2, I think it is, and they are that's accounted for within the scheme that you see before you. So this is an image of they're all the same. The houses are all the same. They're very kind of quite typical detached houses of that kind, and that shows a relationship between the existing houses around the site on Meadow Head Drive on the left, and the proposed houses slightly lower, and the separation distance too. So we've concluded there are no significant adverse impacts to outweigh the benefits of the development and the presumption in favour of development as set out in the MPPF. So we're recommending approval, Chair.
Thank you for that, Chris. I've got Nikki, then Mark, and Glynis, then Henry, then Marianne, and Richard. Yeah. Nikki.
Thank you, Chair. It's fastest finger first today. So, you mentioned
competition.
Of course not. We're all winners. You said the site was cleared at some point within the last 12 to 18 months. I have some concerns about how that was done. So there were previously garages there that were removed. I know most of these garages are quite difficult to remove. They have that corrugated iron roof that often has asbestos in. And I think it was Councillor Woodcraft who pointed out about on the ground. There was likely bits of asbestos on the ground there when we were visiting. We've got things within the report, conditions that look at things like, no development shall commence until certain things have been looked at, like contamination. There's even ones later on that talk about no demolition or construction shall start until...
Nikki, are you asking a
I
question?
am, yes.
Doesn't feel
yes.
like it.
Well, keep listening. That no actual demolition can happen until, and it's to do with, the wheels of the vehicles being clean that go in or out. But then on page 57, on number 17, it says about, in the event that there is, I'm skipping a few lines down to the 4th line, unexpected contamination at any stage of the development process, work should cease and the local planning authority should be contacted immediately. So I'm no expert on all of this, but it worries me that it could get to this stage and there could potentially be asbestos on the ground there. Or do we have, are there things that happen when people demolish something where they have to prove that they've gone through the right processes.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, there's a whole kind of suite of conditions that deal with the contamination and the potential for contamination on the site, and they are numbers 8, 9, 10, 17, 18. I think that was it, actually. 18. Yes, 17 and 18. So that beyond 17, if you like, there is also 18 that requires a validation report to say that when the development's nearing completion or at the appropriate stage of development, usually upon completion, that a validation report is submitted to confirm that everything's been done in accordance with the appropriate strategies that were in place, and that would also pick up any questions of unexpected contamination, and that's what they're designed for. They are our standard conditions that go on a good proportion of applications for new development.
Just to follow up, if later on in the development, would you be able to pick up that at the beginning, when it was just a pile of rubble, there was asbestos there? I'm not an expert on this either, but it worries me that stuff can already have happened even before it's got to this stage that could have not followed the right procedures for dealing with this kind of material and created a health hazard for people locally and us walking through there.
That should be picked up in the subsequent stages, that the earlier of those conditions that was mentioned, 8, 7.
Pre-commencement conditions.
The 8 won't, because that's more of almost a desk-based exercise. But there will be a need for intrusive investigation, and that will involve going onto the site and actually carrying out examination of the site. So that will pick that up. Yes, yeah. Prior to construction works commencing is the phrase in the condition.
So there's nothing in terms of they're allowed to just demolish stuff even before.
No, they're not actually. So there should have been a prior approval application, which we can only consider 2 things in that, which is the method of demolition, which would have picked something like this up. There's also slightly duplicated by building regulations as well, because there's a requirement under building regulations to do that. And the other thing for us is any restoration proposals that we think are necessary. So they should have done that before, but they haven't done.
But what, sorry?
They haven't done.
They haven't. I suppose lots of questions spring to mind. Sorry. But is there a legal angle to this in terms of, are there any implications for not having done that first bit? I know we're not meant to consider past behaviour, but this seems quite a big red flag to me, that if somebody has done that, or not done that.
At this stage so far, we could consider enforcement action, but at this stage, so far after, and long after it's happened, when you consider that the 2 issues for us to consider are the method of demolition and the proposed restoration of the site. It's not a visually prominent site, so we're not concerned about it from that point of view. They've already done the demolition, so I'm not certain what, as you're aware, we only take enforcement action where it's expedient to do so. I'm not certain it'd be expedient to do so, given it's already happened.
But isn't it, sorry, again, my ignorance, what's the, define expedient here for me?
Nikki, I think you have to bear in mind that after 10 years, it becomes very problematic whether you can take enforcement action anyway.
We're saying 12 to 18 months that they demolished it, and there's a possibility they could have left asbestos. I do understand that It's very restricted what we can make judgments on, but I can't help as a councillor for this city be worried that we're going to give planning permission potentially to people who have left asbestos there, but allegedly.
I don't have a sort of dictionary definition of expedient, but I would say it's usually, is it worth it? Does it serve any useful purpose to do so?
I think
Victoria wants to come in at this point.
I'm not used to Victoria. Thank you. I just wanted to say, obviously, in terms of, I'm not going to try and give a definition of expedient, but in this instance, obviously, the method of demolition, obviously, that's occurred. So, you know, but in terms of sort of remediation and dealing with it, obviously, you know, if this planning application were to actually be implemented, obviously, it would deal with that through these conditions. But I would anticipate that if this planning application is implemented and they don't do this, you know, obviously, you don't have to do it. I would expect that the enforcement team may give consideration to enforcing, you know, dealing with the site within the time period for, obviously there's that immunity period, but obviously that would be something that enforcement would look at and deal with and make a judgment on whether it is expedient to deal with it, but based on the considerations they take into account. But as I've said already today, in terms of applicant behaviour, it's just, although, you know, you may say it's a red flag as to what may happen in the future, it's not a material planning consideration in that respect. Thank you.
Mark, you're next.
Similar but not completely identical is the pictures show far more tree cover originally than I had realised on the side. So was that clearance of the trees all done without any sort of planning permission?
Yes, but the trees weren't protected, so there wasn't a need for any application.
Well, it still seems to me that we're rewarding bad practice by allowing him to make a load of money out of building these houses if he's done all of this stuff, both the garages and the trees, without a buy or leave, as it were.
As I say, the trees, in terms of planning law, they've done nothing wrong. And they've been a bit hasty with the demolition and clearance. But we wouldn't, in all circumstances, it's not the only site across the city where that might have happened, and we take a view, as I say, choose that word again, as to whether it's expedient to take action at any given time. If we are going to in cases like that, it would usually be once they've started or at the very early stages of them starting, because it may be that we don't want the building to be demolished.
So did no one come and none of the neighbours object when he started chopping down trees?
I don't know. I don't answer that.
Vicky, do you want to come in on this?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention this idea of rewarding or punishing behaviour just isn't something that the planning system takes account of. What we're being asked time and time again is this a reasonable use for the land? And when we make that decision, we need to do it in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. I've got Glynis next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of points. Chris, could you go back to the plan showing the houses? That's the one, yeah. You went on about how deep the garden should be. You prefer 10 metres. But how far are those houses away from each other? When they're facing each other, there's not much of a road to get in and out. And are those houses very far apart, front to front?
No, they're not. They're less than 21 metres. They're probably in the order of about 12, something like that. They're slightly angled from one another, which reduces the amount of potential for overlooking. But we often, and well, not often, quite routinely support development of new housing estates where the view across the road or across a public area, a non-private area, is much narrower than 21 metres. So you can have a road that's only kind of 5.5 metres wide or something, a couple of footpaths, and short front gardens, and lots of situations where houses have that kind of relationship.
Yeah, I've walked around them, I've seen them, so I know all about those. And this is the problem. There's only 2 parking spaces per property. And one of them is inline parking, which people really don't like doing because somebody's got to go out and move the cars around to get in and out. 4-bedroom properties with only 2 parking spaces is really bad. And on an estate near us in Mosborough, they're built like this. Tony will know, the Ruby Estate. The houses are really close together and you can hardly walk round. People can't get the cars in and out, and it's an absolute... When you're asking people to be really nice and have a nice neighbourhood, it doesn't feel like a nice neighbourhood because all you've got is cars and you struggle to get anywhere. People complain about, and they say, oh, you've put little things in to stop us speeding. Well, there's no way you can speed on some of it. And then a speeding bump or something blocks somebody else parking, and it is a right...
Can you
really
frame this as a question, which is where we're at the moment,
sorry,
rather than an
question
opinion?
is, so why... Well, my question was, why are they so close together initially?
I think I've kind of answered that across a highway or a private access road, as in this case, as I said, we routinely accept them in that situation because the privacy issue is not as critical as it is when you're talking about private rear gardens and the views into and across them and into properties across them. There's an acceptance that across that public space there are going to be people in that area. So that's why we accept them. In terms of I'll let Helen speak because she's been here a long time and not had the opportunity. But in terms of the car parking, just to clarify, there are 2 external spaces, but there's also the garage as well. I know some people don't use the garage for the car parking, but there are potentially three spaces.
Helen, do you want to add any more to this?
There isn't really a lot to add, in all honesty. I mean, yeah, our current parking guidelines do count a garage as parking space, albeit, as Chris says, we do know that, garages are very often not used. So on that basis, we'd have to say that each of those properties had 3 parking spaces, which is actually in accordance with the guidelines that we currently have. And there is the visitor parking as well, which is something that we very rarely get on a lot of developments, so that's actually a positive on this side. But I do appreciate what you say about new estates and on-street parking. Thanks, Chair.
Henry, you're next.
I mean, a lot of it would be duplication at this point, trees getting chopped down, asbestos getting lobbed around, inability to judge applicants or applications based on the applicant being frustrating, but there is a question. The aerial photo of it from before the trees were chopped down, there looks to be a lot of very mature trees. I'm just struggling to look at that and then look at that aerial view of the houses and see where you're going to get 10% BNG delivered. I mean, that's a woodland. Sorry, Chris, my bad. For some reason, I had it in my head that it was on-site provision. If it's off-site, that's out.
Thank you for clearing that up. Marianne.
That's great. That's kind of following on, actually. So just to be clear, we're being asked to approve today retrospective demolition of the garages in 2023 and the new dwelling houses. That's right, isn't it? Okay, I mean, I think like others, I'm not particularly comfortable with this concept of retrospective, you know, because it did have high ecological value, a well-established habitat. But I think we've already explored that, you know, very poor behaviour. So I'll move on. So you said that the BNG metric takes account the biodiversity of the site previously, so before the damage was done. So that's really good to hear. And we've got the units set out at page 76. So can I just talk this through? So the first proposal was that it would all be off-site, and then the opinion of the council ecologist was that actually the sequential approach hadn't been undertaken, so you need to look at on-site first and then off-site. So obviously they were quite right to point that out. And then I think it looks like there's going to be native hedgerows and some wildflower planting on-site. Is that right? And then the rest will be delivered off-site. So do you know how much of the 3.4392 units is on-site mitigation? That's fine. And then for the off-site provision, has anywhere been identified? Have we got any? Nothing. Okay. Thanks.
Could it be a reason for refusal, Chris?
No, Chair, I don't think I need that under. That's how the system's set up nationally. So it would be reasonable to reject it on that basis.
I think, if I may as well, it is a bit of an issue in Sheffield and other local authorities where there aren't sufficient amounts of units banked up, ready as well. So that's probably, yeah, one of the issues.
It is something that's been worked on, though. We are getting some sites in place. Gary?
Are you on comments, Chair?
No, we're on. I haven't had Richard yet. Richard's got a question. Sorry, Richard.
Actually, Chair, to upset you, I'm converting my question to a comment, so I'll take my turn.
Any more questions? Okay.
Chair, before you do move to that, I really apologies for this, everyone, but there were some details on the supplement, quite limited, but some details on the supplementary information at page 1 I just wanted to draw to members' attention. There were some additional representations saying the same as what had previously been said and recorded in the report, and a very minor tidy up of a condition relating to obscure glazing, which is number 24.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, over to members' comments. Gary.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I prefer the 4 bungalows, because you've got more space and everything. And we sit round as councillors doing policy year in, year out, making things better for our city. And then we've got a 10%, we say we need space for everybody to play, sit and relax in your own garden. Now, in my opinion, we shouldn't change that, even if it is slightly. Is it 2.4 or 2.6 or 0.4 or 0.6, where it's 10, it's whittling it down to 9.2 or something like that. So I feel like we shouldn't do that, because we like I said, we work hard doing policy. We go through full council and everything for that. So and then not having permission to demolish in the first place. When I took a piece, I'm sorry to ramble on, Chair, but when I took a piece of asbestos out of my chimney, I didn't realise at first it was asbestos. I wrapped it in black bag straight away, sealed it all up, rang the experts at Ecclesfield. They came out, took it away, analysed it, and sent me a bill for £250 to get rid of it. You know what I mean? So you do right and proper things all the time, don't we, all of us? You know what I mean? And when you hear something like this, I mean, 16 garages, so that's 16. What material are those roofs? You know what I mean? I know what materials is, in my own opinion, what they might have been. So what I'm going to say, Chair, is I can't vote for this. It's overdevelopment. 4 were maximum in my own opinion last time. and I can't change my mind on that, Chair, so I should be voting against it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Gary. I would say that the officers want to respond on the decontamination of the site that would be necessary for this to
I
proceed.
think it might just be worth reflecting that as Chris and Vicky both said, you know, we can't take into account the fact that they demolished the buildings without planning permission. And even if we had, we wouldn't have considered how they deal with the asbestos, because that's for other bodies to consider. It's not part of the planning regime. So, and it's also perhaps just worth noting that, you know, yes, you might consider it to be overdevelopment, and that's a judgment, and it doesn't comply with that requirement for a 10-metre back garden in every case. But we also have to then bear in mind the tilted balance and whether or not that sort of, yeah.
Can I just jump in there and say whether it significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits of the proposal? Thank you.
Yes, members would have to be satisfied that that is the case. And bear in mind that the planning inspector, you'd want to hope that the planning inspector would agree with you on that. Richard, you have some comments.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, it's not often I agree with Gary, but on this occasion I find myself doing so. I think this is a clear example of overdevelopment of a site. The clues are in the fact that several of the back gardens are too short from our guidelines, but guidelines are there for a reason, and I think whilst they are guidelines, they should be a good marker of what we should have. The fact that the properties facing each other are very close together. I'm not 100% convinced, unfortunately, about the car parking, but I hear what you say. And I just think that, and I know before Vicky jumps in and talks about the tilted balance, there are plenty of ways of getting 5 dwellings on that site, but not like that. So I will be voting against this.
Did you want to add anything to it? Vicky?
Not particularly. It's just obviously from what members are saying is that what's been said already is that some members think that it's overdevelopment and are potentially considering refusing for that reason. And in making that decision, they believe that that does significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits as an adverse impact. You know, whether that will stand up, whether that's a robust decision with evidence, is something that a planning inspector may end up deciding on. I don't know whether Chris wants to come in and give me his view on whether overdevelopment is something that he thinks could be substantiated at an appeal or not. But obviously that's potentially what members are saying, is that they believe that the overdevelopment does overcome the tilted balance.
Chair, on the point of overdevelopment, clearly we don't think it is, because we've recommended approval and not raised that as an issue, even in the kind of the balancing of it. And that's because I think when you're looking at overdevelopment on a site and with a layout like this, you know, you're usually looking for a particularly cramped relationship. And yes, as I said at the beginning, the gardens are marginally short, but they are, I mean, you know, we're talking about this short, no more. And it's, in the context of 10 metres, it's barely sort of measurable. So I wouldn't like to kind of, and again, you know, it's guidance, it's not, it's guidance that supports policy rather than enshrined in policy as an absolute minimum. So I think that would be difficult to demonstrate. Then you start to look at things like the highways aspects, the parking provision and what have you. And we've said that, you know, three vehicles per property actually meets our guidelines. And they've demonstrated with tracking, etc., you can get in and out of the site. So I think we'd be really struggling to support and evidence an overdevelopment case with this number of properties on a site of this size. Also bearing in mind that, you know, we're below our target density range. The MPPF has references throughout it to maximising density to achieve sustainable development and avoid I mean, we know all about potential greenbelt incursions, what have you, but that kind of thing. So I think it would be very difficult to pick up on Vicky's point to demonstrate overdevelopment, in my view.
Thank you, Chris. Henry, you have some comments.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, two car parking spaces and a garage is a car parking space and a garage more than most Sheffield residents have got. So I think there's plenty of parking. I don't consider it to be overdevelopment, especially in terms of whether we increase housing density in Sheffield a little bit or throw a load of greenbelt under a bulldozer. So I'll be voting for it. As much as I don't like previous behaviour on the land, I don't object to what's being proposed to do with it next. And on a side note, asbestos can be recycled at any of our excellent household waste recycling centres if it's double bagged and taped. You should save yourself 200 quid.
I think most of us learn a hard lesson at some point in our lives, so don't be hard on Gary. I don't see any more people wishing to make comments. Something I should have raised earlier was I crossed the bridge over the dry brook, but I wasn't clear from the report what would happen for the property that does have the longest garden there. Whether that is expected to be taken out, that big slab of concrete left in place, or the garden would be remodelled.
Chair, it will become a private garden, so it's to a degree open to them to decide what to do with it. But it needs access across. It obviously was virtually bone dry yesterday, but the people will need to get across it from time to time. So I imagine it will probably remain, but I can't say that for certain.
Oh, thank you for that. It was just something I should have mentioned earlier, but there we go. Okay, so we have this application on the table. There are no proposed amendments to it. Can I see from members whether a vote in favour of the application? And thank you. And can I see those voting against?
Chair, were you voting then?
Well, I was waiting to see how it was folding, but
So we're taking against then?
I see 5 against and 6 in favour. So
2, 3, yeah.
All right, should we go through the process again then?
I think it might be prudent.
Yeah. I mean, I'm seriously concerned that if we vote this down, this will be one on appeal, knowing the way the inspectors work. And next month you will get a report on what happens to those applications where we go against what the inspectors decide. And ask a question.
Whether it's likely to go to appeal and what the outcome will be, surely that's not something we should consider when making our judgment.
I think that's me. No, you're quite right. How that goes isn't a material consideration. But what the guidance says in respect of the consequences of an appeal decision that goes against the council in respect of costs is that it is reasonable to consider whether you've got robust evidence to substantiate your reasons for refusal. So that's what, have you got evidence to substantiate the reasons for refusal? That's what you need to address your minds to. The outcome of appeal and the consequences of appeal, you're right, that's not something to take into consideration. But can you evidence your reasons for refusal?
It feels a bit like we're being pushed to make a particular decision here.
In that respect, I'd say you're being asked to make a robust decision where, should it go to appeal, that you believe that appeal can be defended on the basis of a reason that with evidence. Obviously, some members have said they believe it's overdevelopment, and then that's a perfectly reasonable judgment. What you're being asked to do here is to reach a planning judgment based on the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, overdevelopment is something that can be a reason for refusal, and appeals can be won on that basis. But it's whether you believe that there's either evidence or, and obviously evidence in that respect hasn't necessarily got to be a professional report. It can just be your judgment. It can be sufficient, but whether it is or not is something that would be determined at a later date, potentially through an appeal. So you'd be asked to make a robust decision that will stand up to scrutiny, in your opinion. And obviously any member is able to take whatever decision they wish to take, but bear in mind, yeah, do you feel like that evidence or that reason could possibly be substantiated at appeal? Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take a vote again. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Are there any abstentions? One abstention.
Yeah,
So that vote is carried and the application has passed. Thank you all very much for that.
Yeah, can I just bring something up at this point? When a decision comes like this, what we've just had, we have one officer after another telling us what will happen, you know what I mean? And we all know what happens after, so we don't need telling once we made a decision here, you know, and then it gets a bit fluffy, you know what I mean? People saying one thing or another. So then there's a debate then, so we have to listen to one officer after another officer telling us what could happen, and we should have strong evidence, or we should have this or other. And I find that a little bit off-putting as me sat here as an elected member, because I'm making my judgment on what I've heard today and what I've read in the reports. You know what I mean? So that's just a comment. I don't need anybody to come back to me, but that is worrying, and I've noticed it over this last year. You know what I mean? So it's something we should be taking forward, and I should be asking a senior officer to look into it as well. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Gary. We'll see what comes back. Item 9, record of planning appeal submissions and decisions, page 151.
Nothing to report, Chair, particularly. We have had a lot of these sort of digital double-sided advertising unit applications, and we've tried to resist a lot of them, and there have been a lot of appeals submitted. And the inspector hasn't agreed with us in quite a few cases, so that has sort of, I suppose, made a dint in our appeal record, but largely it's down to those digital hoardings which we've been trying to resist.
And how does that compare with those that are outside of the normal appeals?
I haven't done a comparison, but no, I have looked recently at the reason why our appeal record is so low, and it was largely because of those. The vast majority were because of the advert hoardings.
Might be worth doing a bit of analysis on that to see what happened last year and where we go this year.
Well, I think the analysis we need to do is whether we're making the wrong decision and whether we actually need to allow more more advert hoardings, which isn't necessarily what you want to hear.
Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Before I run off, I'd just like to say thank you from myself on resisting applications for illuminated hoardings. I think they're the absolute scourge of society, and I would much rather you continue to do that than we had a better appeal rate.
Will that go in the minutes?
Yeah.
I think that should go in the minutes.
Yeah, can go in the minutes.
Thank you for that, Henry. Time and date of the next meeting. Oh, sorry, can we note the report, please? Yes? Yeah, I take nodding for assent. And lastly, time and date of the next meeting is to be arranged and we will be notified.
And I've got a provisional date if you'd like.
Oh, a provisional date for Tuesday, the 27th of May. So hold that in your diaries, please. Thank you.